My father sent me here as punishment, she remarked to the feared Duke, but she ended up choosing to stay. The morning her father called her into his study, Ilara did not bother sitting down. She had learned years ago that sitting in that room gave her father an advantage. It made her look small and patient, like someone waiting for a verdict. Standing, she could at least hold her own posture, keep her shoulders back, and meet whatever was coming with her eyes open. She stood near the window. Outside, the garden was dull and overcast, the rose bushes stripped bare by the late autumn wind. The house, once lively, once full of warmth and voices, had grown quieter every year, the way a place does when the money runs out slowly, like water draining from a cracked basin. Her father sat behind his large oak desk. His name was Edmund Whitmore, and he had once been a man of considerable presence. He was still tall, still broad, but the confidence that used to fill a room when he walked in had hollowed out, replaced by something tight and anxious that lived behind his eyes. He was shuffling papers. He had been shuffling the same papers every morning for the past 3 years. "I have made arrangements," he said, without looking up. Ilara waited. "There is a man," her father continued, "in the north. Duke Aldrich Voss. You know the name." She knew the name the way everyone knew the name. From whispers passed over dinner tables, from the careful way people lowered their voices when he was mentioned, from the fact that no one in their social circle had actually met him, and yet everyone had something to say about him. The feared Duke, some called him. The man who had no warmth in him. The man whose first betrothed had packed her bags and left within a week of arriving at his estate, and who had never explained why, and who had never spoken of it since. "I know the name," Ilara said. Her father set down his papers. He looked at her then, and she saw in his face the thing he never said directly, the calculation behind the softness, the way he dressed decisions in the language of necessity, so he never had to call them what they were. "He has agreed to take you as a ward, temporarily. A season, perhaps 2. It is an arrangement that will benefit the family." Ilara said nothing. "He has connections that could restore what we have lost. His estate in the north is substantial. He has agreed to settle a portion of the debt in exchange for me," Ilara said. Her father did not flinch. "In exchange for the arrangement." "What arrangement, father?" "You are sending me to a man I have never met, to a place I have never been, in exchange for his money. That is what you mean." Edmund Whitmore looked past her at the window. "It is not so simple." "It is exactly so simple. You are 23 years old, Ilara. You have turned down every reasonable introduction I have arranged for the past 4 years. The family is not in a position. The family is in the position it is in because of choices you made," she said. She said it quietly, without anger, which was worse than anger. Anger could be dismissed. Quiet truth stayed in the room long after it was spoken. Her father's jaw tightened. "You will leave on Friday," he said. "Mrs. Holt will help you pack." And that was it. No discussion, no question of what she wanted, or feared, or hoped. The decision had been made in some back-office negotiation she had not been part of, and her only role in the whole thing was to show up and be agreeable. She left the study and walked up the stairs to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the wall for a long time. She did not cry. She had learned, somewhere along the way, that crying in this house accomplished nothing. What she did instead was think. She thought about Duke Aldrich Voss, about the north, about the cold gray landscape she had heard described by people who had passed through it on their way to somewhere else. She thought about the woman who had left his estate after a week. She thought about the fact that her father had chosen this man specifically, which meant either that her father believed she was strong enough to manage whatever this Duke was, or that he simply did not care what happened to her, as long as the debt was settled. She suspected it was the second thing. And she thought about something else, something that settled in her chest like a small, hard stone, the quiet knowledge that whatever was waiting for her at Voss Manor, it could not be worse than staying here and slowly becoming invisible. She began to pack her own bags. She did not wait for Mrs. Holt. Friday arrived with the kind of gray English morning that gave no promises. The carriage came at 7:30. It was not a fine carriage, nothing so grand as to suggest her father was in good standing. But it was solid, and the horses were reliable, and the driver was a quiet man named Owen, who touched the brim of his hat at her, and asked no questions. Her father saw her off at the door. He squeezed her hand once. She wondered if he felt the distance in her grip, the way she returned the gesture without leaning into it, the way she stepped back and into the carriage before he could say anything more that required her to respond with kindness she did not feel. The carriage rolled away. She looked out the window and watched the house recede. The peeling paint on the front gate, the broken latch on the garden wall that had never been fixed, the windows on the upper floor that caught the pale morning light. She waited to feel something about leaving. She felt, instead, a strange and careful relief. She had a small bag of books with her. She always had books, 3 of them, chosen deliberately. One she had read before and loved, for comfort. One she had never opened, for distraction. And one that was practical, a brief history of the northern counties, because she believed in knowing the shape of the place you were heading toward before you arrived. The drive north took 2 full days. The first day passed through familiar landscape, rolling fields, small market towns, the occasional church spire rising above a cluster of rooftops. Alara read. She watched the scenery change. She ate the lunch Mrs. Holt had packed, cold chicken, bread, an apple, and drank cold water from the flask at her side. Owen stopped twice to rest the horses, and she stepped out each time and walked in small circles to keep her legs from stiffening. By the evening of the first day, they reached an inn where rooms had been arranged. The inn was clean and quiet. Alara ate supper alone at a small table near the fire, a bowl of soup and some bread, and she listened to the conversations at nearby tables without joining them. A pair of merchants arguing about a delayed shipment, an older woman traveling with her daughter who kept falling asleep against her mother's shoulder, a group of young men who were loud and cheerful and talking about nothing important. Ordinary life, moving at its ordinary pace. She found it steadying. In her room that night, she lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about what she actually knew of Duke Aldrich Voss. The facts were sparse. He was, by most accounts, somewhere in his early 30s. He had inherited the title at 19 when his father died. He ran his estate efficiently. There was no debt, no scandal of that kind, no creditors circling the property. He had, some years ago, been briefly engaged to a woman named Caroline Ashworth, daughter of a baron, and the engagement had dissolved without formal explanation. Caroline Ashworth had subsequently married someone else, quickly, and was said to be quite happy, and she had never spoken publicly about her time at Voss Manor. The less reliable information, the kind that spread through drawing rooms and took on new details with each retelling, painted a different picture. He was said to be cold, severe, that he did not welcome visitors, that his staff feared him, that the estate in the north was more fortress than home, that the last 2 people sent to negotiate contracts with him had returned unsettled, unable to explain exactly why, only that the Duke had a way of looking at a person that made them feel they were being examined rather than met. Alara had turned all of this over in her mind many times in the days since her father's announcement, and each time she arrived at the same conclusion. People were afraid of things they did not understand, and they filled the gaps in their understanding with exaggeration. The Duke was probably cold. He was probably difficult. He was probably not accustomed to being challenged or questioned or spoken to plainly. She was very good at plain speaking. She closed her eyes and slept. The second day of travel was different from the first. The landscape changed around mid-morning. The gentle rolling fields gave way to something broader and sterner. The hills grew taller. The color of the land shifted from green to a darker, more muted palette. The trees became fewer and more wind-shaped, leaning in the direction of the prevailing weather, as though they had long ago accepted that fighting it was pointless. There were fewer towns. The road was still good, well-maintained, which told her something about the Duke's investment in the region. But the spaces between settlements grew longer. Twice she saw figures working in distant fields, small against the wide sky. Once she saw a hawk circling high above, and she watched it until it dropped below the ridgeline and was gone. By the afternoon, the light had taken on a quality she had not seen before, cleaner, somehow, and harder, the way light looks when it has less to filter through. The sky was enormous here. That was the thing she noticed most. In the city and in the gentle southern countryside, the sky was something you saw above the buildings and the trees. A strip of it, a patch. Here it was the dominant feature of everything. It pressed down on the landscape with a kind of authority. She found it unexpectedly beautiful. Owen called back to her at one point, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "Manners about an hour ahead, Miss Whitmore." She put down her book. She looked out the window and tried to prepare herself. Not emotionally. She had done as much of that as she was able. But practically. She thought about how she would walk in, how she would stand, what she would say and, perhaps more importantly, what she would not say. She would not perform gratitude she did not feel. She would be civil and composed, and she would not pretend that this arrangement was anything other than what it was. But she would not be reckless either. She was walking into someone else's house, someone else's life, and she had enough sense to understand that the first impression mattered, even if she intended, eventually, to be entirely herself. The gates of Voss Manor appeared around a long bend in the road. They were iron, tall, worked with a design she could not fully make out as the carriage passed through them. Something angular and deliberate. Beyond the gates, a long drive of pale stone cut through grounds that were tidy but not ornamental. No flower beds, no fountains. The trees lining the drive were oak, old, solid, widely spaced, casting long shadows across the pale ground. The house itself appeared at the end of the drive, and she understood immediately why people spoke of it the way they did. It was not ugly, but it was not welcoming. It was large and gray, and built with the kind of proportions that made it look like it had been designed to endure rather than to impress. The windows were tall and evenly spaced, and the stone around them was the same gray as the winter sky, which meant the house seemed almost to dissolve into the afternoon light rather than stand against it. The carriage stopped. Owen came down and opened the door. Alara stepped out onto the pale stone drive and stood up straight. A woman in a dark dress was already coming down the front steps to meet her. The housekeeper, clearly. A woman of about 60, with sharp eyes and an efficient walk. Behind her, 2 young women, who must have been household maids, and a young man, who moved to take Alara's bags from the back of the carriage. "Miss Whitmore," the housekeeper said. She had a northern accent, clipped and direct. "I am Mrs. Gareth. I run the house. The Duke has asked me to settle you in. He will see you this evening." "Thank you," Alara said. "I am glad to be here." It was not entirely true, but it was not entirely false either. She was, at the very least, glad to be somewhere, glad to have arrived, glad to be standing on solid ground after 2 days of rolling road. Mrs. Gareth looked at her with the particular directness of a woman who had spent her life taking the measure of people, and was rarely wrong about them. Alara met her eyes without flinching. Something in the housekeeper's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. Not quite approval, but the possibility of it. "Come in then," Mrs. Gareth said. "I will show you your rooms." Alara picked up the bag of books herself and followed her inside. The room she was given was on the 2nd floor, facing east. It was a good room. Large, clean, with a fireplace and an actual writing desk beside the window, which she appreciated more than the size of the bed or the quality of the curtains. The window looked out over what she thought must have once been a kitchen garden, now maintained but not elaborate, with neat rows of dormant winter beds and a low stone wall at the far edge. Mrs. Gareth showed her the adjoining dressing room, the location of the bath, and where extra candles were kept. "Supper is at 7, the housekeeper said. "The Duke takes his evening meal at 8. He asks that you join him." "I will be there," Alara said. Mrs. Gareth paused at the door. "Can I ask you something, Miss Whitmore?" "Yes." "Have you been told much about the Duke? About what to expect?" It was an unusual question for a housekeeper to ask an arriving guest. Alara considered it. "I have been told quite a lot," she said. "Whether any of it is accurate is something I intend to find out for myself." The woman studied her for a moment. Then she gave a small, measured nod and left without further comment. Alara set her bag of books on the desk, opened the one she had been reading in the carriage, and sat down in the chair by the window. She did not read. She looked out at the winter garden and the low gray sky and the still, wide landscape beyond the wall, and she thought, well, here I am then. And he had better be more interesting than the rumors. She did not know, sitting there, in the quiet of that east-facing room with the pale winter light falling across her hands, that she would still be in that house 4 months later. She did not know that the desk where she had set her books would become the place where she wrote the most honest letters of her life. She did not know that the man she was about to meet at dinner would be, beneath everything she had heard about him, someone she had not expected. Not someone easier than the rumors suggested, but someone stranger, and more real, and in ways she could not yet articulate, more worth knowing than anyone she had encountered before. She only knew that the day was almost over, and the fire was beginning to warm the room, and that in a few hours she would meet the Duke. She got up, smoothed her dress, and began to decide what she would say when she walked into that dining room. She decided, as she had always decided in situations where she felt uncertain, to simply tell the truth. That had always been, in her experience, the move that unsettled people most. And something told her, for reasons she could not entirely explain, that with this particular man, unsettling him first would be important. She dressed. She pulled her dark hair back simply, with no attempt at elegance. She wore the gray dress with the white collar, not the better dress her mother had made her pack. The better dress was for performing, and she was not here to perform. At 5 minutes to 8, she walked down the stairs. The house around her was very quiet. The walls were hung with paintings she passed too quickly to examine. The floors were dark polished wood. The light in the hallway was dim and amber, from wall lamps that burned steadily. She found the dining room at the end of the main corridor, behind a pair of tall doors that stood half open. She could see the long table inside, set at one end with 2 place settings, candles burning between them. She pushed the door fully open and walked in. The man standing beside the fireplace turned when she entered. This was Duke Aldrich Voss. He was, as she had noted from what little information existed, younger than the title made him sound. He was perhaps 30, 32, with dark hair and a face that was arranged in an expression of such deliberate neutrality that it told her immediately he had practiced it, not out of vanity, but because he had found it necessary. He was tall. His posture was the posture of a man who had been told all his life that how he stood mattered, and had decided, at some point, that he agreed. He did not smile, but he also did not look at her the way men usually looked at her when she arrived somewhere new, with assessment, with expectation. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything, directly, carefully, as though he was looking for the thing behind the thing. He said, "Miss Whitmore." "Your Grace," she replied. He gestured to the table. "Please sit." She sat. He sat across from her, at the head of the table. A servant appeared from a side door, with a soup tureen, and moved quietly around them. They were silent for a moment. The candles burned. The soup was set before them. He looked at her across the table. "Did your journey go well?" "It did, thank you. The road is well maintained." "I see to that." Another silence. Not uncomfortable, exactly, but dense. There was a great deal in the room that had not been said, and they were both aware of it. He said, "I understand this arrangement was organized rather quickly." "My father organized it, yes." He looked at her steadily. "And are you content with that?" She put down her spoon. She looked back at him with the same directness he was offering her. "No," she said, "I am not content with it, but I am here, and I intend to make reasonable use of the time. That seems more productive than resenting the situation." He blinked. Just once. But it was enough to tell her that the answer had surprised him. "Most people," he said carefully, "when they arrive here, try to make a good impression." "I imagine they do," Elara said. "I find that exhausting. I would rather you know from the beginning what kind of person I am, so that neither of us wastes time on assumptions." He was quiet for a moment. "And what kind of person are you?" She thought about it honestly. "Practical, curious, sometimes too direct, which people find uncomfortable. I read too much, and I ask too many questions, and I dislike pretending to feel things I do not feel. I am told these are not ideal qualities in a woman." "Who told you that?" "Most people." Something shifted in his face. Not warmth, not yet, but something. An awakening of interest, so slight that if she had blinked, she might have missed it. "Why did your father send you here?" he asked. And she looked at him across the candlelit table, this man with his careful posture, and his practiced neutrality, and his house full of things she did not yet understand. And she said the truest thing she knew. "My father sent me here as punishment," she said simply. "He has never known what to do with me, so he sent me somewhere far away, and hoped that the distance would make me easier to manage." The room was very still. Duke Aldrich Voss set down his fork. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not the way he had been looking before, with assessment, but with something that was beginning to look, just barely, like recognition. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "That is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in this house in a very long time." "I told you," Elara said, and picked up her spoon again. "I find pretending exhausting." She did not look up, but she heard it. The faintest, briefest exhale, almost nothing, from the other side of the table. Not quite a laugh, but the ghost of one. They ate their soup in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the kind that follows something true, when the air has changed, and both people in the room know it, even if neither one says so yet. The next morning, Elara woke before the house did. She lay in the east-facing room and watched the pale light arrive through the tall window, slow and careful, the way light comes in winter, when it has no confidence in itself. The fire had burned low overnight, leaving the room cool, but not cold. She could hear nothing. No street noise, no voices, no carts rattling over cobblestones. The silence was so complete it had a texture to it, like something you could press your hand against and feel. She got up. She washed her face in the cold water from the basin on the dresser, dressed without hurrying, and went downstairs before the rest of the household had properly begun its day. She had always been an early riser. Her mother, who had died when Elara was 14, had been the same, up before everyone, moving through the quiet house with a cup of tea and a book, claiming the morning hours as her own, before the day demanded things of her. Elara had inherited this from her, and in the years since her mother was gone, those early hours had become the part of each day she protected most fiercely. She found the kitchen easily. The cook, a wide, warm woman named Mrs. Birch, looked up from her work at the stove, with mild surprise when Elara appeared in the doorway. "Miss Whitmore, you are up early." "I always am," Elara said. "Would it be very inconvenient if I made tea?" Mrs. Birch pointed wordlessly at the kettle. Elara took this as permission. She made tea, borrowed a small bread roll from the basket on the counter, and took both upstairs to her room, where she sat at the writing desk by the window and looked out at the winter garden while she ate. The garden in the morning light was different from the evening. The low stone wall at its edge was dark with moisture. The dormant beds had a kind of intentionality about them. Even in their winter state, you could see that someone had thought carefully about their arrangement, had planned for what would grow there in spring. It was not a grand garden. It was a productive one. Someone had built this for use, not show. She thought about the dinner the night before. She turned it over carefully, the way she turned most things over. Not to find fault or to congratulate herself, but to understand it. What had been said, what had not been said, what she had learned. She had learned that Duke Aldrich Voss was not what the rumors described, or rather, he was not only what the rumors described. He was controlled, yes, every gesture, every word, measured before it was released. But underneath the control was something watching, something alert, something that had not simply gone dull with indifference, but had retreated behind a wall it had built for specific reasons she did not yet know. The moment that stayed with her was not the one she had expected. She had expected her honest declaration, "My father sent me here as punishment," to produce cold offense, or dismissal, or at least a tight silence. Instead, it had produced something she could not quite name. Not warmth, but the shadow of something that had once been warm, and that had recognized something across the table. She was curious. She admitted to herself, genuinely curious. Not in the way she had been curious before she arrived, which was the intellectual curiosity of approaching an interesting problem. This was something slightly different. This was the curiosity of a person who has met another person and suspects that what is visible is only the surface of something worth looking at more carefully. She wrote a letter to her friend Clara Holt, no relation to Mrs. Holt the housekeeper, who lived in Bath, and who had been her closest friend since they were girls. Clara was the person Elara wrote to when she needed to think aloud on paper. She wrote, "I have arrived. The house is gray and enormous, and quite unlike anywhere I have been before. The landscape is extraordinary, in a way that is difficult to explain. It does not try to be lovely, and perhaps because of that it is. The Duke is not what I expected, which is to say I am not certain yet what I expected, but he surprised me. I have been here less than 24 hours, and I am already asking myself questions, which you know is my way of saying that I am interested despite myself." She folded the letter and set it aside to send later. Then she sat quietly for a while, and let the morning be what it was. At 9 o'clock, she went downstairs properly. The house had come alive. She could hear it. Footsteps on the floors above and below. The distant sound of someone splitting wood in the yard behind the building. The smell of bread baking from the kitchen. Mrs. Gareth appeared in the main hallway as Alara reached the bottom of the stairs. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore. Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you. The room is excellent. Breakfast is in the morning room. Second door on the left." The morning room was smaller than the dining room, with lower ceilings and a bay window that looked out over the front drive. There was a table set with bread, butter, jam, boiled eggs, and a pot of tea. She had been eating for perhaps 10 minutes when the Duke came in. She had not expected him until later. She looked up. He was already dressed in the manner of a man who had been up for some time. There was a slight dampness at his collar that suggested he had been outside in the cold morning air. He stopped briefly in the doorway when he saw her, something she might have missed if she had not been watching, and then he came in and sat down at the other end of the table. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied. A servant appeared and filled a cup of tea for him. He accepted it without comment. They ate in the same kind of silence as the dinner the previous night, not empty, but full, like a room where something has been left behind. Alara spread butter on her bread and looked at the window and the drive outside, where early morning frost still clung to the stone in the shadows. After a while he said, "What do you intend to do with your time here?" She looked at him. "I had hoped to understand the place. I learned by walking around things." "Around things," he repeated, as though testing the phrasing. "The estate, the grounds, the surrounding area. I find that knowing the geography of somewhere helps me understand the people who live in it. You are going to study the landscape in order to understand me." She considered denying this, then decided not to. "Among other things," she said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his cup, then, "You may go where you like in the house, with the exception of the east wing. That section is not in current use." "I understand," she said. She did not ask why. She would find out in time. "Owen can take you out in the carriage if you wish to see the wider grounds, or if you prefer to walk. The path along the ridge to the north gives a good view of the valley." "I prefer to walk," she said. "I thought you might." She looked at him. He was looking at his bread. He said it without any particular expression, the way you say a thing you have noticed about someone when you are not yet sure how they will receive the observation. "You have barely spoken to me," she said. "What makes you think you know anything about what I prefer?" He looked up. "Last night at dinner," he said, "when you sat down, you moved the chair 2 inches to the left so that you were facing the window rather than the wall." She stared at him. "Most people," he continued, "when they sit at a table, orient toward the other person. You oriented toward the view. That tells me you prefer space and perspective to proximity." There was a long pause. "That is a very particular kind of attention," she said carefully. "Yes," he said, and looked back at his cup. "It is." She sat with this for a moment. The fact that he had noticed, the fact that he had remembered, the fact that he had drawn a precise and accurate conclusion from something so small. It was not comfortable, being seen that clearly, but it was also not uninteresting. "In that case," she said, "I will walk to the ridge. Take the left fork past the stone barn," he said. "The right fork is soft ground in winter." And that was all. He finished his breakfast, rose, and left without ceremony. Alara sat at the morning room table for another few minutes after he was gone, looking at the window and the frost on the drive. She thought, he notices things. She thought, so do I. She thought, this is going to be more complicated than I expected. She got up and went to put on her coat. The path to the ridge was exactly as he had described. Left fork past the stone barn, solid footing even in the cold, a gradual climb through open land with the wind pressing steadily from the west. Alara walked with her hands in her pockets and her face into the wind, and let the landscape do what it did, which was take up all available space and demand your full attention. The ridge itself was a long, flat spine of land above the valley, and when she reached it and turned to look south, she stopped walking. The view was not dramatic in the way views are dramatic in paintings. No towering peaks, no crashing sea. It was simply wide. The valley spread below her, gray-green and quiet, threaded through with the silver line of a small river. The village was visible in the distance, a cluster of rooftops and a church tower. And beyond it, further hills, layer after layer of them receding into the haze, each one a slightly paler gray than the one before it. She stood there for a long time. She thought about what it would be like to grow up in a place like this. To have this view be the one you carried in your bones, the measure against which you compared all other landscapes. She thought about the boy who had grown up in that gray house below her, who had inherited the title at 19, and had never, as far as she could tell, quite recovered from whatever had shaped him before that. She had been told very little about his family. She knew only that his father had died, and that there had been a brother, and that things had not been easy. The careful blankness of the information itself told her something. People did not leave gaps in stories, unless the thing that filled those gaps was too heavy to carry in casual conversation. She turned and looked north. In that direction the land was wilder, the grass stiffer, and the stone walls older. A hawk was circling somewhere far out over the open ground, riding the same wind she was standing in. She breathed the cold air, and felt, to her own surprise, something she could only describe as gratitude. Not for the situation, not for her father's decision, or the arrangement, or the strangeness of arriving in an unknown place on someone else's terms, but for the morning itself, for the view, for the fact that she had legs and lungs, and a mind that could take in a landscape and want to understand it. She was alive, and she was here, and those were things. She walked back to the house in good spirits, her cheeks raw from the cold. The first week passed in a rhythm she had not quite expected. The Duke was absent for much of each day. He worked, she gathered from small observations rather than direct information, in his study for the mornings, and on the estate itself in the afternoons, overseeing whatever the running of a property this size required. She saw him at dinner each evening. Occasionally she passed him in the hallways, and he would give a brief nod, and she would give one in return, and they would continue in their separate directions. But small things accumulated. On the third day, she found a book left on the table in the morning room, a volume on the history of the northern estates, much more detailed than the one she had brought herself. There was no note with it. She looked up at the door, then back at the book, then picked it up and took it to her room. On the fifth day, she was in the library, a large, well-stocked room she had been spending her afternoons in, when she noticed that a lamp had been moved to the table nearest her usual chair. It was an improvement. The afternoon light from the west window was poor for reading, and the lamp made it considerably better. She had not asked for it. She had not mentioned the problem to anyone. Someone had noticed and corrected it without being asked. She sat with her book and said nothing, but she thought about it. On the seventh day, she was walking back from the ridge when she met him on the path. He was coming from the direction of the eastern part of the estate, wearing mud-stained boots and carrying something she could not immediately identify, a piece of iron fencing, she realized, that had come loose. They stopped when they reached each other on the narrow path. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Your Grace," she said. "Did you fix the fence yourself?" He looked down at the piece of metal in his hand, as though he had forgotten he was carrying it. "The man who usually handles it is unwell. Is it something a man who usually handles it should be handling alone, or could another pair of hands help?" He looked at her. "Do you know anything about fencing?" "No," she said honestly. "But I learn quickly, and I am not afraid of cold metal." Something crossed his face. She could not name it. He looked at the fence post, then at her, then back at the path. "Come along then," he said, and turned back the way he had come. She followed him across the cold ground to where the fence had pulled away from its post, and she held the section steady while he worked at resetting it, and neither of them spoke very much, but the silence was easy, the way silence is easy between people who are not yet friends but who have decided, without discussing it, that they do not need to fill every moment with words. When it was done, he looked at the repaired post, and then at her. "You held it straight," he said. "You said nothing about straight," she said. "I assumed." He turned, and they walked back toward the house. "Why did you come out to the ridge again today?" he asked. "Because I did not finish looking yesterday." "What were you looking at?" She thought about it. "The layers," she said. "The way the hills recede, each one slightly paler than the one before. I wanted to count how many I could see before they disappeared into the sky. He was quiet for a moment. 14, he said. On a clear day, I have counted them. She looked at him sideways. He was looking straight ahead, his expression giving nothing away. But he had answered her, and it was an answer that told her he had asked himself the same question once, and that he had thought it worth counting. She walked beside him the rest of the way to the house and said nothing more. But she thought, he is not cold. He is careful. There is a difference. She thought, I am going to need to think about that difference. She thought, I am, perhaps for the first time since Friday, not thinking about my father, or the debt, or the arrangement at all. She went inside. She changed out of her muddy boots. She sat at her desk and stared at the winter garden for a while. Then she opened her book and read until dinner, and when dinner came she went down, and they sat across from each other in the candlelight and talked. This time, actually talked, about the history of the valley, and the construction of the stone walls, and the difference between the birds she had seen on the ridge, and the ones that came to the garden in spring. He knew a great deal about this place. He spoke about it with the kind of knowledge that only comes from genuinely caring about something over a long period of time. And when he spoke about it, the careful blankness in his face changed. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. Enough that she could see the outlines of something warmer underneath it. She drove home that evening, back to her room, back to her desk, back to her east-facing window, with the feeling that she had seen something she was not supposed to see yet. Not something secret, just something true. And the thing about true things, she had always found, was that once you had seen them, they were very difficult to unsee. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, which was not a dramatic day for a dramatic thing. Alara was in the hallway outside the main sitting room when she heard voices, or rather, one voice raised and another voice quiet. The particular combination that tells you immediately that something unjust is occurring, and that the quiet voice belongs to the person with less power. She stopped. She was not in the habit of listening at doors, but the hallway amplified the sounds from the partially open sitting room door, and she was standing close enough that stopping her ears would have required a more deliberate effort than simply listening. The raised voice belonged to a man she had not seen before, a visitor, she gathered from what followed, who had arrived that morning to discuss some matter of estate business with the Duke. The quiet voice belonged to a young footman named George, who was perhaps 18, who had worked at Voss Manor for 2 years, and who had, apparently, been clumsy enough to knock over a tray of papers in the visitor's vicinity while attending to the room. The visitor was not responding to this as an accident. He was speaking to George in the voice that certain men reserve for people they have decided do not merit any particular care, dismissive and pointed, designed not just to correct but to diminish. He was using words like careless and incompetent and you people, and the particular ugliness of it was not the volume but the casualness, the way he spoke, as though George's discomfort was irrelevant information. George was apologizing. He was apologizing very quietly and thoroughly, in the way young people apologize when they are frightened and not sure what else to do. Alara walked into the room. She did not burst in. She opened the door in an ordinary way and walked to the center of the room as though she had come to retrieve something, which gave her a natural position in the space. "I am sorry to interrupt," she said pleasantly. "I was looking for the letter I left this morning. George, did you happen to see it?" George looked at her with the expression of someone who has just been thrown a line over water. "No, Miss Whitmore, I am afraid not. Not to worry. I likely left it upstairs." She turned her attention to the visitor with a smile that was entirely composed. He was a man of about 50, with a reddish complexion and the build of someone who had been athletic once and was carrying the remains of it. "I do not believe we have been introduced," she said. "I am Alara Whitmore." The man straightened. The shift was immediate and slightly absurd. The same man who had been speaking to a teenage footman, as though he were less than furniture, was now adjusting his posture and producing something approximating social warmth. "Clive Barton," he said. "I have some business dealings with the Duke." "Of course," she said. "I will let you continue. I hope George has been helpful to you this morning." She said it lightly, easily, with no edge in it that he could point to. But she said it, and George heard it, and the man heard it too. and they all understood what she was doing, even if none of them named it. She left the room, and she heard, as she went, the visitor begin speaking again, but in a different register. Lower, more measured. She found the letter she had not actually been looking for, because it had never existed, and she went back to the library and sat down with her book. She was reading, or attempting to read, when she became aware that someone had stopped in the doorway. She looked up. The Duke was standing there. He looked at her for a moment, with an expression she could not immediately categorize. "George told me what you did," he said. "I retrieved a letter," she said. "You did not retrieve any letter." There was no letter. She looked at her book. He was being unkind to a boy who dropped some papers. The Duke was quiet. "Clive Barton is a significant business contact," he said carefully. "I am sure he is," Elara said. He was still being unkind to a boy who dropped some papers. Another silence. She turned a page she had not actually read. "You understand," the Duke said slowly, "that making social interventions on behalf of my staff is unusual for a guest." "I am sure it is." She looked up then. "I am going to ask you something, and I would like you to answer honestly. Do you think I was wrong?" He stood in the doorway for a long moment. His face did through several things she could not quite track. "No," he said finally, "you were not wrong." "Then we are in agreement," she said, and went back to her book. He stayed in the doorway for a second longer than was necessary. Then he left. That evening at dinner, George served with a straightness to his back that had not been there the day before. And when he caught Elara's eye briefly, as he set down her soup, he gave her the smallest possible nod, the kind that could barely be called a nod at all, but which carried the full weight of gratitude, compressed into the tiniest gesture available to a professional young man at work. She received it without changing her expression, but she felt it. The Duke, she noticed, saw it too. Clive Barton departed the following morning, and Elara thought nothing more about it. The incident had happened, and it was over, and she had done what she had done, and she would have done it again. What she did not expect was what happened 3 days later. She was in the library after lunch, reading, when Mrs. Gareth came to find her. "The Duke asks if you would come to the garden," the housekeeper said. This was unusual. The Duke did not usually request her presence in the middle of the day. Their contact was reliably structured. Breakfast if they happened to be at the same time. Dinner every evening. The hours in between were their own. She went to the garden. He was standing near the kitchen garden wall, which she had been watching from her window for the past 2 weeks. He was holding something. A paper. Some kind of document. He looked up when she approached. "I have reinstated George's position," he said. She blinked. George was going to be dismissed? His probationary period was ending. Barton made some remarks before he left about the standard of service. "I was going to release George from the position." She stood very still. "And now?" "Now I am going to keep him." He looked at the paper in his hand. "He has been here 2 years. His work is reliable. And you were right. I had no reason to value Barton's opinion of a boy who knocked over a tray more than the boy's actual record." Elara was quiet for a moment. She was sorting through what she was feeling, which was a mixture of satisfaction and something more complicated. The awareness that he had changed a decision because of something she had done, that he had not simply acknowledged she was right, but had actually acted differently. That was unusual. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He nodded. He looked at the garden. She looked at the garden too. After a moment, he said, "My mother planted this. The kitchen garden." She turned to look at him. He was still looking at the beds, the neat rows, the low wall, the bare winter soil. "When did she pass?" Elara asked. "I was 12. 2 words. He said them flatly, as though they had been said many times before, and the saying of them no longer required any weight. But the very flatness of it told her how much weight there had once been, and how long ago he had decided to put it down. "I lost mine at 14, she said. "It changes the shape of everything after." He looked at her then. "Yes," he said, "just that." But it was a yes that meant, "You know what I know, and we have not met many people who know it." They stood together beside the kitchen garden wall in the cold afternoon air, and neither of them said anything more about it. and neither of them moved away. After a while she said, "Does anything grow here in spring that is particularly worth seeing?" And the tension in his shoulders, the particular set he carried that she was beginning to recognize as his default, shifted, just slightly. He began to tell her about the kitchen garden, what had grown there when his mother planted it, what he had continued, what he had changed. He spoke without looking at her, looking at the beds, and she stood beside him and listened, and the afternoon light moved across the cold ground and the dormant garden and the gray house behind them. She was not thinking about her father. She was not thinking about the debt. She was not thinking about the arrangement or the reasons she was here or how long she was expected to stay. She was thinking, "I want to see this garden in spring." The thought came quietly, without fanfare, and she turned it over in her mind once and then let it rest there. She had been at Voss Manor for 3 weeks when she found the East Wing. She had not been looking for it deliberately. She respected the boundary the Duke had set, East Wing closed, not in use, and had no intention of trespassing simply out of curiosity. But she was exploring the upper floors one morning, looking for a room Mrs. Gareth had mentioned as containing a collection of old maps, and she turned a corridor and walked through an unlocked door before she realized, from the change in the air, staler, colder, the particular smell of a space that is maintained but unvisited, that she had crossed into the wrong part of the house. She stopped immediately. She looked around. She was in a wide corridor, carpeted in a pale color, that was thick with dust at the edges where the housekeeping did not reach. The doors on either side were closed. The light came through a window at the far end, and it was thin and cold, and did nothing to make the corridor feel inhabited. She turned to go back, and then she noticed the painting. It was hanging at the near end of the corridor, the end closest to the door she had come through, which was why she had not seen it when she walked in. It was a portrait, a man and 2 boys. The man was seated, the boys standing beside him, and the composition was formal in the way formal portraits always are, but there was something about it she could not look away from. The 2 boys were perhaps 10 and 7. The older one had a face she recognized. It was him. It was Aldrich Voss, as a child, before the years that had shaped him into the man she was coming to know. The younger boy, smaller, lighter, with a wider face, and something more open about his expression, she did not recognize. A brother, the brother she had heard mentioned in passing and never in detail. The father in the painting sat very straight. He had the Duke's dark hair and the Duke's exact posture. He was not smiling, but that was ordinary for portraits of this kind. What was less ordinary was the way the 2 boys were positioned. The older one slightly in front, a child's instinctive placement of himself between the younger one and something he could not name. She looked at the painting for perhaps a minute, and then she went back through the door she had come in through and pulled it gently shut behind her. She did not mention finding the corridor. She did not ask about the East Wing, but the painting stayed with her through the day. The older boy's posture, the younger boy's open face, the particular way a child stands when he has already learned that his job is to shield rather than to simply be. That evening at dinner, she asked a question she had not planned to ask. "Do you have siblings?" she said. The change was immediate, not dramatic. He did not flinch or stiffen or produce any of the obvious responses. But something in his face, the careful neutral expression he always maintained, went slightly more careful, the way a door does when it is being held shut from the inside. "I had a brother," he said. She did not say anything. "Frederick," he said. "He died 11 years ago." She did not say she was sorry, because she had always found that phrase inadequate, and she suspected he had heard it more times than it meant anything. She said, "Were you close?" He looked at his plate. "Yes," he said. "We were." And then he picked up his fork and began eating again, and the subject was closed, and she did not push at it. She had not intended to ask. She had not expected the answer to take the shape it did. But she thought about Frederick all evening, and about the boy in the painting who had stood in front of his brother, and about the man across the table who had built so many closed rooms around himself that she was only just beginning to understand how many there were. She went to bed that night with a very different sense of this house than she had woken up with that morning. It was not a cold house. It was a house in mourning for things it had not finished grieving, and the man at the center of it had decided, at some point, that letting people in meant exposing those things to air they might not survive. She lay in her east-facing room and listened to the night and thought about that. She thought, I understand now why the portraits are turned to the wall. She thought, I wonder if anyone has ever told him that the things we do not look at still exist. She thought, I wonder if he knows. She fell asleep with the wind pressing at the window and the fire low in the grate, and she dreamed, briefly and without particular significance, of a painting on a wall in an empty corridor, and two boys standing in the order that children stand when one of them has already learned to worry. She had been at Voss Manor for a month when she began to understand the grammar of the house. Every house had one, a system of small signals and unspoken rules that told you more about the people who lived there than any direct conversation. In her father's house, the grammar had been one of careful performance, the best china brought out even when there were no guests, the way her father straightened in his chair whenever he heard voices in the hallway, the permanent low-level tension of a family managing the distance between what they appeared to be and what they actually were. Voss Manor had a different grammar entirely. Here, things were not performed. The silver was polished because it was good silver that deserved to be kept well, not because someone was expected to admire it. The meals were plain and well made. The fires were kept carefully because the house was cold in winter, not because warmth was something being offered to visitors. The staff moved through the house with the ease of people who had been given clear expectations and met them, not with the nervy hovering of people trying to manage an unpredictable employer. The house ran, she realized, with something close to precision, and the Duke, quiet and careful and largely invisible to most of the people who spoke about him, was the source of that precision. She watched him when he did not know she was watching, which was rarely because he nearly always knew she was watching, which was something else she had learned about him. He noticed things. She had noticed that he noticed things on the first full morning, when he told her about the chair. But she had continued to gather evidence since then, small moments, the kind that would not mean anything in isolation, but that built into a picture when you added them up. He noticed when the lamp in the library was inadequate for reading. He moved it. He noticed when George was being spoken to, in a way that left the boy smaller than he had been before. He changed his decision. He noticed when Alara walked back from the ridge with mud on her boots and a brightness in her eyes that she had not had when she left. He did not comment on it, but at dinner that evening he had asked, without preamble, without explanation, whether she had counted the hills, and she had said 14, and something brief and real had moved across his face. He was a man who paid attention. He had simply decided, at some point, that he would not let it show. She was beginning to understand that the decision had cost him something. The fourth week brought a visitor she had not anticipated. His name was Philip Crane, and he was, she gathered quickly, an old friend of the Duke's, perhaps the oldest, perhaps the only one who still came regularly to the manor. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, with a pair of hunting dogs and a familiarity with the house that told her he had been coming for years. He knew which door to use, where to hang his coat, which chair was his in the sitting room. He was about Aldrich's age, with an open face and the easy manner of a man who had never had to work particularly hard to be liked. He saw Alara in the hallway when he arrived, and introduced himself with genuine warmth. "Philip Crane," he said, "and you must be Miss Whitmore. I heard about you." "From whom?" she said. "Aldrich, obviously, though he would not call it mentioning you. He mentioned you in the way he mentions things he is actually thinking about, which is to say, he mentioned you once and then became very interested in his dinner." She looked at him. "What did he say?" Philip Crane grinned. "That you were direct." That is not a compliment from most people. From Aldrich, it is the highest one available. He looked at her with an honest, easy assessment. He said direct. He meant that you surprised him. Those are different things to most people, but the same thing to him. She thought about this as Philip Crane went to find the Duke, and she found that she could not stop thinking about it through the rest of the afternoon. That evening, dinner was the three of them. It was different. The room was different, or rather the Duke was different in the room. He was not warmer exactly, but slightly less contained. Philip spoke freely, and Aldrich responded, and watching the two of them she could see the outlines of who Aldrich might have been before whatever it was that had shaped him, before the loss of Frederick and the years of careful self-enclosure. Philip told a story about the two of them at school, something involving a misdirected letter and a very confused headmaster. And Alara watched Aldrich's face during the telling, watched the reluctant movement of it towards something that was unmistakably amusement, the way his mouth pressed together the way mouths do when the person is trying not to smile and failing. She did not stare, but she saw it. After dinner, Philip excused himself early, saying he needed to see to the dogs. She suspected this was a deliberate retreat, giving the two of them the evening. She and Aldrich sat in the sitting room with their tea. This was new. They had not done this before, sat together after dinner in a room that was not the dining room. It felt more ordinary, which somehow made it more charged. He said, "Philip told you something." "He told me you mentioned that I was direct," she said. Aldrich looked at his tea. He would. "Was that the word you used?" "Yes." "What did you mean by it?" He was quiet for a moment. "I meant that you say what you think." "And that surprised you?" "Yes. Do people not usually say what they think?" He looked at her. "Around me? No. They say what they think I want to hear, or what they think will gain them something, or they say nothing at all, because they are not comfortable. You walked into this house and told me your father sent you as punishment before we had finished our soup. I told you it was true." "I know," he said. "That was the part that surprised me." The fire was burning low. Outside, the night had settled fully, and the wind she had become accustomed to moved against the windows in its steady way. She had come to find the wind here companionable rather than bleak. It was constant, reliable, and it did not pretend to be gentle. She said, "Can I ask you something I have been wondering about?" "You are going to ask it regardless of whether I say yes," he said. She almost smiled. "You have noticed that too." "It is very noticeable." "The portraits," she said. "In the main hall, they are all turned to face the wall." A pause. "Yes. They have been like that since before I arrived, I think. Mrs. Gareth said nothing about them, so they must have been that way long enough that it is ordinary. 9 years, he said. She waited. He looked at the fire. There were portraits of my father in the main hall. After he died, I could not remove them, because they had been there since the house was built, and removing them seemed too final. But I could not look at them, so I turned them. She sat with this information carefully. "And the other portraits," she said, "the ones that are not your father." He blinked. He looked at her. "There are others. There are 5 portraits in that hall. I have walked past them every day." A long silence. "I did not intend to turn all of them," he said slowly. "I turned the ones of my father, and then I suppose I stopped looking at the hall, and I did not realize." He stopped. 9 years, she said quietly. "Yes. You have not looked at the hall in 9 years." He said nothing. She thought about what that meant, to turn away from something, and then so fully stop looking in that direction that you do not notice what else you have turned away from in the same movement. She thought about grief and how it moved, how it narrowed the view, how it asked you to avoid one thing, and you ended up, without intending to, avoiding everything in the same vicinity. "Your brother is in the hall too," she said. His face went through something. "Frederick," she said. "There must be a portrait of Frederick in the hall." He put down his tea. He was very still. "I had not thought of that," he said. She believed him completely. It was not the answer of a man who was avoiding something deliberately. It was the answer of a man who had built a wall so carefully around one wound that he had built it around everything adjacent to it without knowing. "I am not telling you what to do," she said clearly. "I am only pointing out what I noticed." He nodded. He said nothing more. They sat in the sitting room until the fire went quite low, and then she said good night and went upstairs to her room, and she heard him stay in the sitting room for a long time after that, quiet in the way the house was quiet, holding whatever it was that the evening had put into the room between them. She did not hear him move through the hall. She did not know, lying in her east-facing room, whether he looked at the portraits or continued to look away. But in the morning, when she came downstairs, one of the 5 portraits in the main hall had been turned back to face the room. It was the smallest one, a young man of perhaps 20, with a wide face and an open expression that she recognized from the painting in the East Wing corridor. Frederick. She walked past it and into the morning room and sat down and poured her tea and said nothing to anyone. But she held it in her chest all day, the fact of that one-turned portrait, and it felt like something, though she could not have named exactly what. Progress, perhaps, towards something she did not yet have a word for. Philip Crane stayed for 3 days, and the 3 days were good ones. She liked him genuinely. He was easy company, not because he was light or unserious, but because he was comfortable in his own skin, in a way that made the people around him comfortable too. He had a gift for finding the interest in small things, a conversation with the cook about bread, an enthusiastic discussion with the groundskeeper about soil drainage, a long afternoon spent in the library pulling out old maps and tracing roads that no longer existed. He also had a gift for drawing the Duke out of himself in small ways that did not feel like effort. She watched this carefully, not with envy. She was not trying to compete with Philip for Aldrich's ease, but she was curious about the mechanism of it, the way you are curious about any effective thing. Philip did not work at it. He simply proceeded as though Aldrich was already a person of warmth and interest, as though the wall were not there, and Aldrich, faced with a person who refused to acknowledge the wall, seemed, in those moments, to step slightly in front of it. On the last evening, Philip walked with her in the garden after dinner, while the Duke was occupied with an estate matter inside. "How long are you staying?" Philip asked. "I am not entirely certain," she said. The arrangement was open-ended. He nodded. He did not ask more, which she respected. "He is different with you here," Philip said after a moment. She glanced at him. Different how? Philip considered this with an honesty she had come to expect from him. "More present," he said. "He is usually very far away, even when he is in the same room. Not rude, just distant. These past 3 days he has been more in the room than I have seen him in a long time." She did not know what to do with this. She looked at the dark garden. "I am just a guest," she said. "I know," Philip said. "That is what makes it interesting." He left the next morning, the dogs loaded back into the carriage, and his easy warmth going with them. The house settled back into its usual quiet, but it was not, she noticed, quite the same quiet as before. Something had shifted while Philip was there. Some small degree of the Duke's habitual containment had loosened, and it had not entirely closed again once Philip left. She did not examine this too closely. She only continued as she had been continuing, reading in the library, walking to the ridge, appearing at breakfast and dinner, learning the grammar of the house and the way the light moved through it in the afternoon. But she began to notice, in the days after Philip's departure, that the Duke lingered a little longer at breakfast, that the conversations that had previously lasted through one course were now lasting through two, that he had asked, once, what she was reading, and when she told him, he had said he knew the book, and they had talked about it for the remainder of dinner, disagreeing at several points with a pleasantness that she found she enjoyed enormously, because disagreeing with someone well requires both people to be genuinely engaged, and she had not, in a long time, been genuinely engaged in an argument with anyone. She went to bed that night having argued about a novel for an hour and a half, and she felt more awake than she had felt in months. She lay in the dark and thought, "This is a strange place to be finding out what I want." She thought, "But here I am, finding it out anyway." She thought, "The kitchen garden in spring," and fell asleep with that thought still in her head, quiet and warm and surprising. The first week of December arrived with a cold that was different from the cold of the previous weeks. Before, the cold had been clear and dry, the kind that made the sky vivid and the ridge walk exhilarating. This cold was damp and heavier, settling into the stones of the house and into the ground outside, and making the mornings gray, in a way that suggested the gray intended to stay for some time. Alara found she did not mind it. She had adjusted to the house, to its rhythms and textures, to the specific way the light fell through her east-facing window and across the desk where she spent her mornings. She had adjusted to Mrs. Gareth's brisk efficiency, and to Mrs. Birch's good cooking, and to George's careful formality, which had gradually relaxed into something friendlier in her vicinity, though he remained entirely proper with everyone else. She had adjusted, most of all, to the evenings. Dinner was the part of each day she had begun to look forward to, with an attention she examined sometimes, cautiously, the way you examine something that has developed an unfamiliar significance. It was not the food, which was good, but not elaborate. It was the conversation. It had evolved over the 6 weeks she had been at the manor, from the careful exchange of useful information, the layout of the grounds, the history of the valley, the state of the fencing along the northern edge of the estate, into something harder to categorize. They talked about books, about the difference between a story well told and a story with something true in it, about the question of whether a person could really know another person, or only the version of them that they were shown, about memory and what it was for, and why it could hold something as trivial as the smell of a kitchen from 20 years ago, with more clarity than it could hold the words of a conversation from the previous week. He was thoughtful, not in the performed way of people who want to appear thoughtful, but in the genuine way. She could see him working through an idea in real time, following it to places he had not planned to go, and then finding his way back. He was precise with language. He chose his words with care, not to impress, but because imprecision bothered him, because he wanted to say exactly what he meant, and he was willing to take the time required to find the right form for it. She matched him. She always had been good at this, at following a thread wherever it went, at holding more than one idea at a time, without needing to resolve them. Her father had always found it exhausting. Most people she had known had found it exhausting. The Duke met it directly, without flinching, and returned it with equal precision, and the result was conversations that left her feeling more alive than she had felt in the drawing rooms of her previous life, where the exchange of ideas had been polished to such a smooth surface that nothing could actually grip. She noticed that he was learning her too, not in a calculating way, but the way people learn things they are interested in, gathering data without meaning to, building a picture from small pieces. He knew she read in the morning and walked in the afternoon. He knew she preferred her tea strong. He knew that she tensed slightly when she received letters from her father, which she had done twice now, and that after receiving them she was quieter than usual at dinner, and that she did not want to talk about whatever was in them, and that the right response to this was to simply not mention it, and to talk instead about something she would find interesting. He had done this both times. She had recognized what he was doing both times, and had said nothing, because the gesture was too quiet and too accurate to survive being named aloud. She was learning him too, of course. His afternoon habits, the fact that he walked the northern boundary of the estate every third day regardless of weather, the fact that he sat on the right side of the fireplace and always turned his teacup in a specific direction before drinking from it, a small habitual movement he appeared entirely unconscious of, the fact that he was at his most forthcoming in the mornings, when he was less guarded, and at his most withdrawn on the evenings after dealing with estate business that had not gone well, when the weight of managing everything sat more visibly on him. She learned that his default seriousness had a warm layer underneath it that emerged in specific conditions. When he was outside on the estate, when he was talking about something he genuinely knew well, and she had noticed this with a kind of careful attention, when he was arguing with her. She had been arguing with him, she realized, with increasing frequency. Not about important things, not about the sort of subjects that produced real conflict. About books, about whether a particular approach to managing the estate drainage was more efficient than the alternative, about whether the hawk she had seen on the ridge was the same one or a different bird. Small arguments with no stakes, conducted with complete seriousness by both parties, which was somehow the best kind. During these arguments he came fully present in a way that made her understand what he looked like when he was not behind his wall. His voice changed, not louder, but less careful, less measured. He would say things quickly, spontaneously, before the usual internal editor could smooth them into something safer. And then he would catch himself, and the control would return, but not as completely as before. She was cracking something. She did not know what to call it. She did not let herself think too carefully about why she wanted to crack it. The day she discovered his actual fear was a Tuesday. She had not been looking for it. She had been in the library in the early afternoon, working through a volume on the geological history of the region that she had found on the lower shelf. She had become genuinely interested in the landscape's physical structure after weeks of walking through it, when she heard him in the hallway outside. Not walking, not the usual measured progress of a man with somewhere to be, something different. She looked up. The library door was ajar. He was in the hallway, and she could see through the gap that he had stopped near the large window that faced north. He was holding a letter. He was very still, not the controlled stillness of his usual composure, but a different kind, the kind that comes before something. She went back to her book. She did not want to see something he had not chosen to show her. But she could not entirely not hear. He did not speak aloud, but she heard the sound of the paper being folded, very carefully, once and then again. She heard him walk to the far end of the hallway and stop. She heard, or perhaps felt, the way you feel things in old houses. The particular weight of a man standing still, with something difficult in his hands. After a few minutes, she heard him walk away toward his study. She sat in the library and looked at her book and did not read it. At dinner that evening, she could see it in him immediately, the particular set of his expression that was not his usual neutrality, but something underneath it, something that his neutrality was working hard to contain. He ate without speaking much. She did not push. She talked about the geological volume she had been reading and what she had found in it, and he listened and responded briefly, and she kept the conversation light and did not ask anything that required him to bring himself more fully into the room. After dinner, as she was about to leave for her room, she stopped in the doorway. "Whatever arrived today," she said, without turning around, "I hope it resolves itself." A long silence. "It is about the estate," he said. "There is a creditor, not mine, my father's. A man who says the old debt has been transferred and is now his to collect. It is most likely not legitimate, but the paperwork will take time to establish that." She turned around. He was standing by the table, looking at the cloth. He looked, and she noticed this with care. Tired. Not physically tired, but tired in the way people look when they have been managing something for a long time that they are not supposed to let anyone see they are managing. "You are not actually worried about the creditor," she said. He looked up, a flash of something. "What makes you say that?" "Because you said most likely not legitimate, and you said it without any actual doubt. You are good at managing those things. You have managed this estate alone since you were 19. She held his gaze. "What worries you is something else." He was quiet for a long moment. "If there is a challenge to the estate," he said, slowly, carefully, "it could affect the staff. The people who have been here for years. Mrs. Gareth has been here since before I was born. Mrs. Birch, Owen, George." She understood now. Not the estate, not the money, not his own situation. He was afraid for the people who depended on this house, the people whose lives were organized around its running. He had built this place into something solid and reliable, and he was afraid of being unable to hold it, not for his own sake, but for theirs. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the table. "Then you will resolve it," she said simply. "The paperwork will take time, but it will resolve it, and you know it will, and they are safe." He looked at her. "How do you know what I know?" he said. "Because I watch you," she said. It was honest, and she meant it, and she did not look away from it. "You have been managing this estate for 13 years, and it is managed well. Whatever your father left you, whatever problems came with the title, you have handled them. This one will be no different." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was doing something complicated. "You are very certain," he said. "About this, yes." "Why?" She thought about it. "Because you are the kind of person who finishes things," she said. "I have been here long enough to see that." He said nothing. But the quality of his silence was different from his usual silences. It was softer in some way she could not precisely describe, less contained. "You should get some sleep," she said. "It will look clearer in the morning." She left the room. She went upstairs. She sat at her desk and looked at the dark winter garden and thought about the way his face had looked in that moment. Not the moment when she told him it would resolve, but the moment just before that, when she had said she watched him and he had not looked away. She thought about Philip Crane's words, "He is more present." She thought about the portrait of Frederick in the main hall, turned back to face the room. She thought about a man who had been managing everything alone for 13 years, and who looked, occasionally, in small, unguarded moments, like someone who was very tired of being alone in that management. She did not pursue the thought past that point. She was not ready to pursue it past that point. But she held it there, in the room with her, in the quiet December night, and she did not put it down. The creditor turned out, as Aldrich had suspected, to be attempting something that had no legal standing. The solicitor confirmed it within 10 days. The matter was closed without drama. But the 10 days during which it was being resolved had a quality to them she had not experienced in the house before. He was occupied, spending his mornings with correspondence and his afternoons in meetings she was not part of. But in the evenings he came to dinner and she was there, and the evenings felt, during those 10 days, more important than they had before. She was not trying to make them important. She simply brought herself to the table and talked to him honestly, and listened when he talked. And somewhere in those 10 evenings, something settled between them that had previously been unsettled. On the 10th evening, when the solicitor's letter confirming the resolution had arrived, he came to dinner with the particular quality of a man who has put something down after carrying it for a while. He looked lighter. Not happy, exactly. She was not sure yet what his happy looked like, but easier. They talked through all of dinner about a book she had recommended to him 2 weeks before, and which he had now read. They disagreed, productively and at length, about the central character. She said the character was self-deceiving. He said the character was simply afraid. She argued that self-deception and fear were not the same thing. He said that in practice they produced the same behavior. She said that the distinction mattered because one could be addressed honestly, and the other could not, at least not by the person doing it. He looked at her during this argument, with an expression she could not fully decode. "You are talking about the character," he said. "I am," she said. "Are you also talking about something else?" She held his gaze. "Are you asking me to be?" A pause. Then, very quietly, almost to himself, "I am not sure yet." She nodded. "Then I am only talking about the character." He nodded, and they went back to the book and argued about it until the candles had burned down considerably, and then she said good night and went upstairs, and she stood at her window and looked at the dark garden for a long time before she got into bed. She was not sure what had almost happened in that conversation, but she was quite sure that something had, and that it was worth noting, even if she could not yet give it a name. It was Mrs. Gareth who told her. Ilara had not asked. She had been careful not to ask, not because she was not curious, which she was, profoundly, but because she believed that certain things had to be offered rather than extracted, and that pressing at the closed rooms of someone's history before they were ready to open them was a kind of taking that she did not want to do. But one afternoon, in the second week of December, when the light outside had turned the particular flat gray of an afternoon giving up on itself, she came down to the kitchen to ask Mrs. Birch about something, and found instead Mrs. Gareth sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the specific expression of a woman who had been deciding something for a while and had just reached her conclusion. Mrs. Birch was not there. The kitchen was quiet. "Sit down, Miss Whitmore," Mrs. Gareth said. Ilara sat. The housekeeper turned her cup in her hands once and looked at it. Then she looked up. "You have been here 7 weeks," she said, "and I have watched you." She paused. "I watch everyone who comes to this house. It is my job and my habit, and I have been here long enough that I am very rarely wrong about people." Ilara waited. "I am going to tell you some things," Mrs. Gareth said. "Not because you asked, and not because I am exceeding what is proper. I am going to tell you because you are a person who does better with the full picture, and because what you know about this house and about the Duke is not the full picture, and because—" She stopped. She looked at her tea again. "Because I am an old woman who has watched a good person suffer alone for a long time, and you are the first visitor in 9 years who has turned a portrait back to face the room." The words settled in the kitchen. "I did not do that," Ilara said quietly. "No," Mrs. Gareth agreed. "You did not do it. But you made him see that it needed doing, which is the same thing, in my experience, and in some ways more useful." She put down her cup. "His father," she said, "was a difficult man." She said it carefully, the way people say things they have spent years choosing the right words for. She was not speaking ill of the dead carelessly. She was selecting language the way you select a tool when you need to do precise work. "He was not a man who showed warmth easily," Mrs. Gareth continued, "not to his sons, not to his wife. He was effective at the running of this estate, and he was correct in his behavior in most respects, and he was considered by the county a respectable man. But inside this house he was—" She paused. "He was rigid. He had very exact ideas about what his sons should be, and what they should feel, and what was allowed to be shown. The younger boy, Frederick, found this harder." Ilara listened without moving. "Frederick was a sensitive child," The housekeeper said. Not weak. Sensitive. There is a difference, though his father did not make it. His father saw the sensitivity, and found it unacceptable, and made his views on the subject clear. Aldrich, who was 7 years older, and who worshipped his younger brother, though he would not have used that word, spent a great deal of his childhood trying to stand between the two of them. She paused. Frederick died, she said. He was 20 years old. He had been at university for a year, and he came home in the summer, and there was a conversation with his father that I heard parts of without intending to, and 2 days later, Frederick was gone. Alara's hands were very still in her lap. He fell from the ridge, Mrs. Gareth said. The north side. The ground is steep there, and unpredictable in wet weather. The official account said accident, and perhaps it was. We do not know with certainty, and I do not tell you this to say what I cannot know. But Aldrich was there that morning. He had gone to find Frederick after the argument. He did not reach him in time. The kitchen was very quiet. He has lived with that since he was 23 years old, Mrs. Gareth said. His father died the following year. His heart, the doctor said. And Aldrich became the Duke, and he ran the estate, and he has done it well and conscientiously, and without complaint, and he has let no one pass the first room. She looked at Alara directly. The betrothal, she said. Caroline Ashworth. She was a kind young woman, and I am not speaking against her, but she arrived here, and she saw the closed rooms and the turned portraits and the weight of it all, and she was frightened. She did not understand what she was frightened of, and she could not name it, and so she left. And Aldrich did not try to stop her because he believed. I am telling you what I believe he believed, that this was the right outcome, that bringing someone here was a form of cruelty he should not inflict. A long silence. Why are you telling me this? Alara said. Because you are not frightened, Mrs. Gareth said, and because the only thing worse than not knowing would be knowing half of it and drawing the wrong conclusion from the half you know. Alara sat with this for a time. He turned Frederick's portrait back, she said finally. Yes, the housekeeper said. Last month, I noticed in the morning. He has not mentioned it to me. He will not. He does not speak about Frederick to anyone, but he turned the portrait back. Mrs. Gareth picked up her tea. That is more than he has done in 9 years. She said nothing else. The conversation was complete. She looked at her tea as though the subject was now closed, and Alara understood that it was, and that she had been given a gift of information, and that she was expected to carry it well. She thanked the housekeeper. She went back upstairs. She sat at her desk and looked at the winter garden, and she did not write a letter to Clara, did not write anything. She sat with what she had been given and let it take the shape it needed to take. She thought about a 23-year-old man walking out to find his brother on a wet morning and not reaching him in time. She thought about the years that had followed, the father's death, the title, the estate, the solitary management of all of it, and the particular way in which a person can become very good at the surface of life, when the underneath of it has been shut away for so long that you almost forget it exists. She thought about the dining room on her first night, and the way he had looked at her when she said, "My father sent me here as punishment." She thought about the expression she had not been able to name at the time, the expression of a person who recognizes something, who hears a true thing, and is startled by it, because true things have been uncommon for a while. She thought about all the small exchanges since then. The lamp moved, the portrait turned, the fence mended, the argument about the book, the evening she had said, "I watch you," and he had not looked away. She had not known, doing any of those things, what the full weight of the context was. She had been responding to what she saw in front of her, the man as he appeared to her, without the full history behind it. Knowing the history now did not change what she had seen, but it changed what it meant. She saw him at dinner that evening, and she looked at him the same way she always looked at him. Directly, attentively, without performing anything. But there was something different in what she saw, now that she had been given the fuller picture. She saw a man who had learned to be careful, because carelessness had cost him everything, who had turned every portrait in the hall to avoid seeing one of them, who had kept Caroline Ashworth at such a careful distance that she had felt the distance and not known it was protection, who managed 13 people's livelihoods with total reliability, because the thought of those 13 people being harmed by his failure was the one thing that could still produce visible feeling in his face. She saw a man who had been in mourning for 11 years, and who had never finished the mourning, because he had never been certain he was allowed to. She ate her dinner. She talked about the geological history of the valley, and about a passage in the book they had been discussing, and she was exactly as she always was, and she did not treat him differently, did not look at him with the particular quality of pity that he would notice immediately and find unbearable. But something had shifted in her, quietly and permanently. She was looking at him now with the full picture, and the full picture made certain things very clear. He was not cold. He had never been cold. He had simply learned to live at such a distance from his own interior that the distance looked, from the outside, like coldness. After dinner, when she was about to leave, he said, "You are quiet tonight." She turned. "I am thinking." "About what?" She looked at him. "About the difference," she said, "between someone who has nothing to offer and someone who has decided not to offer what they have." He was still. "I believe," she said carefully, "that the second person is in a much more correctable situation than the first." She said good night and went upstairs. She did not know what he would do with it. She had not said it in order to produce a specific result. She had said it because it was true, and because she had decided, somewhere in the hours since her conversation with Mrs. Gareth, that she was going to continue being exactly what she was, direct, honest, present, and that she was not going to manage her own directness out of consideration for a wall she did not think deserved to stand. Not his pain. She was not unsympathetic to his pain. She was not going to force herself past his grief. But the wall was not grief. The wall was what had been built around the grief, long after the grief itself had hardened into something that could have been lived with, if only the wall had not made it so that there was nothing else to live with. She had learned this from her own life, from years of her father's house, of watching him manage the appearance of things rather than the things themselves. She had learned that the wall always costs more than what it protects. She got into bed and pulled the blanket up and listened to the wind at the window. She was 7 weeks into an arrangement that her father had designed as punishment. She was not thinking of it as punishment anymore. She was not sure what she was thinking of it as, but punishment was definitely not the word. The storm came on a Thursday evening without much warning. The afternoon had been darkening for hours, the sky pressing lower and the wind shifting direction in a way that Owen noticed first and mentioned to Mrs. Gareth, who mentioned it to the Duke, who said nothing in particular, but spent the afternoon walking the outer edges of the estate and checking the outbuildings. Ilara, returning from a shorter than usual walk on the ridge had become inhospitable well before she reached the top, noticed the quality of the light changing, and came back early. By 6 o'clock, the storm was loud. The windows of the house rattled in a way that was different from their usual winter conversation with the wind. The sound was deeper, more insistent. By 6:30, the power of the gusts had knocked down part of a large oak at the western edge of the property, which was not near the house but which made a sound when it fell that could be felt as much as heard. Dinner was brought forward. Mrs. Birch prepared something quick and substantial, and the household ate with the practical efficiency of people who knew there might be things to manage before the night was over. Ilara ate quickly and went upstairs to her room, thinking she would read until the storm eased. She had been in her room for perhaps 40 minutes, sitting at the desk with the lamp burning and her book open, and the wind screaming against the east window with increasing intensity, when she heard it. Not the storm, but something inside the house. A deep cracking sound from somewhere above, followed by a grinding she felt in the floor, and then a rapid series of smaller sounds that could only be one thing, part of the roof giving way. She was out of her room, and in the hallway, before she had quite made a decision to move. The sound had come from the upper east corridor, not the east wing, which was below, but the upper floor above her own. She could hear voices already, someone calling from the direction of the attic stairs, and she moved quickly in that direction, and met the Duke coming up the main stairs at the same moment. "The north corner of the upper roof," he said immediately. "There is a section that has been weakening. I had arranged for repairs in the spring. The storm has taken it early." He was already moving past her, toward the upper corridor. "Stay clear of the north end of this floor." She followed him. "I said." "I heard you," she said. "I am not going to the north end. I am coming to see what needs doing." He glanced at her and did not argue. What had happened was significant, but not catastrophic, which she gathered from the tone of his voice as he assessed it and spoke briefly with Owen, who had come up from the servants' stairs. A section of the upper roof, perhaps 15 feet wide, had buckled inward. No one was in those rooms. They were used for storage, but the damage had brought down part of the ceiling of the room below, which meant the eastern corridor on the upper floor was now open to the night, and the rain that had begun driving in was a serious concern for the structure and contents of the surrounding rooms. "Owen, get the heavy canvas from the north barn," Aldrich said. "We need to cover what we can from the inside. Matthews," to a second man who had appeared, "there are boards in the lower store. Get what you can." He turned to Alara. "Is your room all right?" "My room is perfectly fine. What can I do?" "The room at the far end of this corridor has documents and records I cannot afford to lose. They are on the lower shelves. If the ceiling stays stable, there is no risk to them yet. But if this is going to be a long storm—" "Tell me which room," she said. He told her. She went. The room was a kind of archive, shelves of bound ledgers and loose papers in careful order, years of estate records. The ceiling above was solid, but the window at the north end of the room was already showing stress, and she could hear the storm loudly from here, and she understood why he wanted the lower shelves cleared of anything irreplaceable. She began moving documents, armful by armful, stacking them carefully in the inner hallway, where they would be away from any water risk. She worked methodically, not panicking, not rushing so fast that she dropped things. The Duke appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. He looked at the shelves, at the growing stack in the hallway, at her. "You have done most of it," he said. "The top shelves can stay. They are high enough that water would have to come through the floor first. These are the ones that matter." She looked at the remaining stack. 10 minutes more. He came into the room and began taking the remaining volumes with her. They worked side by side without speaking, which she had become accustomed to with him, the easy physical cooperation of people who had learned each other's pace. He was efficient, so was she. The job was done in the time she had estimated. Then the corridor at the north end of the upper floor made a sound that suggested the damaged section was no longer stable. Owen's voice came from somewhere beyond. "Best clear this floor, Your Grace." They moved toward the stairs. At the landing, the Duke stopped. "The drawing room on this floor is the safest room until the worst of this passes," he said. "The structure is solid there. I need to stay in the house in case anything else shifts." "I know," she said. "I will stay too." They went to the drawing room. It was a room she had not been in much. It was formally decorated in a way that most of the house was not. Chairs and a settee arranged around a fireplace, a carpet that had once been expensive, a mantelpiece with a clock, and a few small objects she had not examined closely. The fire had been left burning. Aldrich went to the fireplace and added wood from the basket beside it. The fire strengthened. Outside, the storm continued at the same ferocious level. The windows of this room shook but held. He stood by the fire. She sat in one of the chairs. "The roof section," she said. "Can it be repaired before spring?" "The damage we have now, yes. If the storm takes more—" He looked at the window. "We will see what the morning shows." "The records are safe," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. "Thank you." It was not difficult. You moved 70 years of estate records in 20 minutes in a storm. You built up 70 years of estate records, she said. The moving was the easy part. He made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. She had never heard him laugh, not fully, but the precursor of one, the shape the breath takes just before. They sat in the drawing room for a long time. The storm did not ease. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. Alara looked at the fire and listened to the wind. After a while he said, "I have been thinking about what you said at dinner, 2 weeks ago." She looked at him. "Which evening?" "You said the difference between someone who has nothing to offer and someone who has decided not to offer what they have." She waited. "I want you to know," he said, carefully, "that the second description is the accurate one." "I know," she said quietly. "I am not." He stopped. He looked at the fire. He was working through something. She could see it, the way he worked through arguments about books, following a thread, not rushing it. "I am not practiced at this," he said, "at saying things directly. I am practiced at managing things, at keeping things running, at being competent. I am not practiced at—" He stopped again. At being seen, she said. He looked at her. You are not practiced at being seen, she said, because you have spent a long time making sure you were not. He was very still. I know about Frederick, she said. She said it gently, without weight in her voice. Mrs. Gareth told me. Not the whole story. She told me enough. I do not need the whole story, and I am not asking for it. A long silence. The fire crackled. The clock ticked. Ah, he said. Just that. I am not looking at you differently because of it, she said. I am telling you I know, because I thought you should know that I know, and that it has not changed what I see when I look at you. If anything, she paused. She chose her words carefully, the way he chose his, because this mattered. It clarifies things I already saw, she said. He was looking at the fire. His profile in the firelight was very still. You are 23, he said. And you came here under arrangements you had no part in making, and you have been here for nearly 2 months he paused, being exactly yourself, being honest in a way that I have not encountered, and I am. He stopped. What? She said. He turned and looked at her, directly, fully, without the wall, which was, she felt this physically, different from any look he had given her before. Not warmer, exactly, but present in a way that went all the way back, without anything between it and her. I am grateful you are here, he said. I am aware that is not what you came here to be told. I am aware that the situation is not one you chose, but I am going to tell you the truth, because I believe you are a person who prefers truth, and the truth is that you are not what I expected, and you have made things easier, in ways I did not expect things to be easier, and I am grateful. Alara sat with this for a moment. Then she said, You are not the punishment, Aldrich. She used his name. She had not done that before. She had not planned to do it, but it was right. He blinked. I mean, she said, I came here because my father sent me. But the reason I am not unhappy here, is not the arrangement. It is you. The person you are, under everything you have built around yourself. That person is, she stopped. Worth knowing, she said. I think that is what I am trying to say. You are worth knowing, and you have spent a very long time making that difficult, and I think you have done it because you were trying to protect people from something that was never actually going to harm them the way you thought it would. The storm was very loud outside. Inside the drawing room, the fire burned, and the clock ticked, and the two of them sat in the strange quiet that exists within storms, in the eye of things. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, You are not punished either. I want you to know that I am aware of what it costs to come here, and I do not, he pressed his lips together. I do not take lightly what you have given this house, what you have given me. What have I given you? She said. He looked at her with that same full, unguarded look. Someone who looks directly at the thing, he said, without flinching, without turning away. I have never had that before. She held his gaze. I am not going to flinch, she said. You should know that from the beginning. If I stay here. If, he said. The word was very quiet. She breathed. When I stay here, she corrected. I will continue to be direct with you. I will continue to ask questions. I will continue to argue with you about books, which I think we have established I always win. Something moved in his face, something warm and complicated and entirely genuine. You have not won every argument, he said. I have won more than half. I would dispute that figure. I know you would, she said. I am looking forward to the dispute. The storm outside peaked, and then, gradually, began to ease. The worst of it moved through, over the following 2 hours, the way storms do, not ending abruptly, but withdrawing, the way something very loud does, when it begins to remember that silence is also possible. They sat in the drawing room together, through the worst of it, and then through the easing of it, and they talked, more freely than they had ever talked before, about things that did not need to be managed or shaped before they were spoken, about Frederick, and about her mother, and about the ridge, and about what the kitchen garden would look like in spring, and about a dozen other things that were small and real, and mattered precisely because they were small and real. At some point past midnight, she fell asleep in the chair. She woke in the gray early morning to find a blanket over her, that had not been there before, and the fire rebuilt, and the storm entirely gone, and the house quiet around her, in the specific way of a house after a crisis, when everything that needed managing has been managed, and the morning has come, and the damage can be seen and addressed in daylight. She sat up. The blanket was dark blue and very warm. She held it for a moment. Then she got up, folded it carefully, and went to see what the morning had brought. 3 days after the storm, a letter arrived from her father. Elara knew from the handwriting on the outer envelope, her father's neat, precise script, each letter carefully formed in the way of a man who had once been told that good handwriting was a mark of good character and had never forgotten it, that the letter was something she would need to sit with before she could respond to it. She took it upstairs. She sat at her desk. She opened it. It was not a long letter. Her father was not a man who used many words when fewer would accomplish the same purpose, which was, she had always thought, one of his most efficient qualities, and one of his least kind ones. He wrote that the debts had been substantially reduced. He wrote that the arrangement with the Duke had served its purpose. He wrote that her time at Voss Manor had been, by his calculations, sufficient. He wrote that he expected her home within 4 weeks, and that her aunt in Hampshire had extended an invitation, which he had accepted on her behalf, and that this would be a good opportunity for her to return to proper society and to resume the normal business of her life. He wrote, the arrangement was always intended to be temporary. He wrote, I am glad it has served the family well. He did not ask how she was. He did not ask whether she was well, or content, or changed, in any of the ways that 2 months in a place can change a person. He had calculated the time, and found it sufficient, and written to retrieve her, as he would have written to retrieve anything he had lent out. She folded the letter. She sat at the desk for a very long time. Outside, the sky was the pale, hard blue of a December day after a storm, and the grounds below her window were marked with the evidence of the storm's passage. A branch down near the wall, the marks of heavy rain in the kitchen garden beds, the particular wet darkness of the stone that told you it had been soaked and was drying, but the damage was being addressed. She could hear, from somewhere on the west side of the house, the sounds of repair work, Owen directing, the solid knock of wood, and the scrape of a ladder. She thought about what her father had written, and tried to find the feeling that it produced in her clearly, without confusion. He had, by his own account, done what he had said he would do, reduced the family's debts, managed the crisis. She had known from the beginning that this was the purpose of the arrangement. She had walked into it with open eyes, with the understanding that she was being used as a practical instrument in a financial negotiation, and that her feelings about this were irrelevant to the transaction. She was not sure she was still angry in the same way. What she felt now was more specific. It was the particular kind of grief that belongs to the moment when you understand, fully and without the protection of hope, that a person you have been waiting to see you has decided they will not. Her father had not written a single word about her, only about the arrangement, the debts, the family, the plan he had set in motion. She was a piece in the plan, and the plan had succeeded, and now the piece could be returned to its shelf. She did not cry. She was beginning to suspect, not a person who cried easily. She felt things deeply. She always had, more deeply than people who did not know her well might have assumed from her composure. But the feeling went inward, rather than outward, settling somewhere private, where she could examine it without performance. She thought about 4 weeks. She thought about Hampshire, and her aunt, who was pleasant but limited, who would organize dinners and introductions, and expect Elara to be grateful and agreeable. She thought about her room in her father's house, the view of the stripped garden, the managed silences and the shuffled papers. She thought, I could go. And then she sat with that thought and turned it over. She could go. She was free to go. In 4 weeks, she would leave this house, and this gray northern landscape, and this kitchen garden, and these conversations at dinner, and she would return to the world she had come from, and that world would receive her back, without having changed in her absence, and she would fit into it, the way she had always fit into it, uncomfortably, approximately, managing the friction. She looked at the desk. She looked at the books on it. She looked at her east-facing window, and the winter garden below, and the low stone wall at its far edge, and she thought about spring. She folded her father's letter, and put it at the bottom of the desk drawer. She did not respond to it that day. The days that followed the letter were strange ones. She did not tell the Duke about it. She did not intend, for the moment, to tell anyone about it. She needed to think it through properly first. And she had always been someone who thought better when the thought was entirely her own, before other people's responses began to shape it. But the not telling had a quality to it, a weight she carried around the house, and she suspected, because she had come to understand his attention, that he felt it. He said nothing. He continued as they had been continuing since the night of the storm, with a new quality in their evenings, a new ease in the air between them, as though something that had been held carefully for a long time had been set gently down and found, upon being set down, to take up considerably less space than expected. He talked more readily. Not more, necessarily. He was still not a man who filled silence with sound, but more readily, with less of the space between thought and expression where the careful editing happened. He laughed, once, properly, at something she said at dinner about the geological volume and its author's particularly violent opinions on limestone, and she held the sound of it in her memory carefully afterward, because it was the first time she had heard it, and it was better than she had expected, brief and genuine, and completely unperformed. She was not made easier by knowing she might leave in 4 weeks. She had not expected it to sit so heavily. On the 5th day after the letter, she walked to the ridge. It was a clear morning, cold but still, and the view to the south was exactly as it was on the best days, the 14 layers of hills, each one paler than the last, the silver thread of the river, the cluster of the village. She stood on the ridge for a long time. She thought about what she had told herself when she arrived, that whatever was waiting here could not be worse than remaining at home and slowly becoming invisible. She had been right about that, but she had been right for different reasons than she had anticipated. The estate had not saved her from invisibility by being grand or impressive. It had saved her by containing a person who looked at her, fully, carefully, with total attention, and who did not need her to be any particular version of herself, who had, in fact, responded to every performance she might have offered with such clear indifference that she had, quite naturally, stopped offering any. She had been more herself here, she realized, than she had been anywhere else in her adult life. That was not a small thing. She walked back to the house. She went to find him. He was in the study. She knew because the door was half open, and she could see the line of his shoulder as he sat at his desk. She knocked on the doorframe. He looked up. "Come in." She came in. She did not sit. She stood near the window, which was her natural position for things that needed saying. "I received a letter from my father," she said. He set down his pen. His face had gone into that particular careful mode, not blank but held, ready for whatever she was about to tell him. "He wants me home," she said, "within 4 weeks. The debts are largely settled. The arrangement has served its purpose in his view." A silence. "I see," he said. "I have been thinking about it for several days," she said, "and I want to tell you what I have concluded, before I write back to him." He waited. "I have not been happy in my father's house for a very long time," she said. "I had not particularly expected to be happy anywhere else, because I had come to believe that the problem was in me, that the friction I felt was something about my own character that would follow me wherever I went." She looked at him directly. "I do not believe that anymore," she said. "I believe the friction was about the fit between the place and the person, and I believe that there are places that fit better, and places that fit worse. And I believe," she paused, "I believe this one fits." He was very still. "I am going to write to my father," she said, "and tell him that I will not be returning in 4 weeks. I will tell him I am staying." The room held this. He said, "The arrangement was—" "I am not staying because of the arrangement," she said. "I am staying because I am choosing to. Those are entirely different things, and I need you to understand the difference, because if you keep it in the category of arrangement, I will become very irritated." Something moved in his face, that brief, controlled movement she had come to know. "There is the matter of propriety," he said carefully. "There is the matter of whether I care about what people in this county think of my reasons for being here," she said. "And I find that I do not, particularly if the alternative is leaving." He was quiet for a long moment. "I should tell you," he said, "that I have not been well practiced at. You have mentioned this. I want to say it clearly. he said. I have not been available in the way that you deserve. I have been here in person and absent in every way that matters for a very long time, and I cannot promise that I will not struggle with that, because I have been doing it for 11 years, and habits of that duration do not simply— Aldrich, she said. He stopped. I am not asking you to be different, she said. I am not arriving with a project. I have seen who you are, the full picture, or enough of it, and I am choosing to stay because of that person, not in spite of him. You do not need to fix anything before I can be here. A very long silence. Outside, she could hear the wind moving across the grounds, quieter than the storm, but still present, still the reliable northern wind that had become, without her planning for it to, one of the sounds she associated with comfort. Then stay, he said. He said it quietly, not a question, not a performance. Just that. A plain word that held everything it needed to hold, without needing to be made larger. She nodded. I will write the letter this afternoon, she said. There is no hurry, he said. You can write it tomorrow. She looked at him. Why tomorrow? Because Mrs. Birch has made something for today, that she says requires eating while warm, and I believe she has been planning it for some time, and it would be a shame to miss it on account of letter writing. She stood in the study doorway looking at this man, this careful, quiet, difficult, precise man, who had noticed she moved a chair to face the window, and had remembered it, who had turned Frederick's portrait back to face the room, who had put a blanket over her while she slept in his drawing room, and had never mentioned it, who had just told her to stay in the plainest possible way, and meant it entirely. In that case, she said, I will write it tomorrow. She turned and left the study, and she heard him, behind her, pick up his pen and return to his work. She went upstairs. She sat at her desk. She did not write the letter yet. She looked at the winter garden and the low stone wall and the pale December sky. She thought, I am staying. She thought, this is what choosing feels like. She thought, I had forgotten. She picked up her book and read until it was time for whatever Mrs. Birch had made that required eating while warm, and she went downstairs and ate it at the morning room table with the December light coming through the bay window, and it was very good. She wrote the letter to her father the following morning. She sat at her desk with the winter light coming across the paper, and she wrote clearly, in her best handwriting, which she used when she wanted to be certain that what she said could not be misread. She wrote, I have received your letter, and I understand that the arrangement has served its original purpose in your view. I am writing to tell you that I will not be returning to your house in 4 weeks, nor to Hampshire. I have decided to remain at Voss Manor. She wrote, This is not a temporary decision. I have thought about it carefully, and I am settled in my conclusion. She wrote, I hope you are well. I hope the family situation continues to improve. I remain, as always, your daughter. She did not write that she was angry. She did not write that she understood, now, clearly, and without any remaining hope that she had been wrong, that he had sent her here, without caring what happened to her, as long as it benefited the family. She did not write any of the things she had felt in the days since his letter arrived. She had long ago learned that writing those things to her father served no purpose. He was not a man who received emotional information and did anything useful with it. He received facts and plans, and he responded to facts and plans. The fact was, she was staying. The plan was her own. She sealed the letter, addressed it, and left it on the morning room table for the afternoon post. Then she felt, very quietly and without fanfare, free. The following days had a different quality to them. She noticed it in small ways first. She walked to the ridge without the background awareness that the walks might be numbered. She sat in the library without counting the weeks remaining. She read her books and arranged her desk and walked through the hallways of the gray house, and it felt, for the first time, like moving through her own space rather than borrowed space. She had not known how much of her mental energy had been dedicated, without her realizing it, to the awareness of temporariness. Now that the temporariness was gone, she found she had more of herself available. She began small projects. She had been interested, since her first week, in the kitchen garden, in what it had been and what it could be, and what it grew in spring. She had been gathering information informally for months, piecing together the history of it from what Aldrich had told her, and what she had found in a household journal in the library, dating back 40 years. Now she sat down with that journal properly, and began reading it in sequence. The journal belonged to his mother. This was not something she had known when she first found it, but reading it now, more carefully, she could hear the voice in it. Practical and warm, sometimes funny, always exact. She could hear a woman who had loved this place and had thought carefully about what it could be, who had planted the kitchen garden not as an ornament, but as a source, as a thing that fed and sustained and gave back each year. She thought about mentioning the journal to Aldrich. She decided to wait. It was his mother's voice. It was his to receive when the time was right. She read the journal and took careful notes about what had been planted in the past, which things had grown well in the northern soil, what the garden had looked like in the springs of 20 and 30 and 40 years ago. She was planning something. She had not fully admitted this to herself yet, but she was planning something. One afternoon, near the end of December, she found him in the east wing. The door was open. This was not unusual. She had learned, over the past several weeks, that the east wing was not always closed. The Duke went there sometimes. She had not gone herself, had not intruded. But today the door was open, and she heard his footsteps inside, and she stopped at the threshold. "Come in," he said, without looking around. She was not surprised that he knew it was her. She came in. The east wing was larger than the corridor she had glimpsed those weeks ago. Beyond the corridor with the painting, there were 3 rooms, a sitting room that had clearly been someone's private space, a bedroom that was as still and tidy as a room can be when it has not been used in a long time, and a smaller room that had been a study. The sitting room was where he was. He was standing near the window, looking out at the grounds. "This was Frederick's," she said. "Yes." He looked at the room. The chair near the fireplace, the books on a low shelf, the rug that was faded but had once been brightly colored. "I had it kept as it was. I do not know whether that was right or not." She looked at the books on the shelf. Some of them had slips of paper tucked between the pages, the way she herself marked things she wanted to come back to. "He was a reader," she said. "He was a reader," Aldrich agreed. "He read faster than I did, and remembered more of what he read." A pause. "He was better than me at most things. Not all things, but most." She said nothing. She let him have the silence. "I come in here sometimes," he said. "Not often, but sometimes." She nodded. She did not ask why. She understood why. "I think," she said carefully, "that this room could remain as it is, and also be used. The two are not exclusive." She looked at him. "Things can be remembered, and also continued. The memory does not have to mean stillness." He turned from the window and looked at her. "You said something like that to me once before," he said, differently. "I said the things we do not look at still exist," she remembered, or something like it. "You also said I had been punished when I thought I was the punishment." She had said that, in the storm, in the drawing room, with the fire low and the wind still howling outside. "Both things," she said. "Both things," he agreed. They stood in Frederick's sitting room for a while longer. It was not a sad room, she thought. It was a room where someone had lived and read and placed slips of paper in books, and it had been kept carefully because the person who had lived there was worth remembering, and there was no reason why a room that had been well loved should not, eventually, be well used again. "I have been reading the household journal I found in the library," she said. "The old one. I think it was your mother's." He was still. "I have not read it," he said. "No," she said. "I thought perhaps not." A long pause. "What is in it?" "A great deal about the kitchen garden," she said, "and the valley in summer, and her thoughts on various improvements to the house, and—" She paused. Her voice, mostly her voice. "It is a very good voice." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "She had a very good voice." "Yes, I can hear it." She looked at the window. Outside, the December light was fading early, the way it did here, pulling away from the sky before 4 o'clock, and leaving the landscape in a blue-gray half-dark that was different from any darkness she had seen in the south. "I will leave the journal on your desk," she said, "when you are ready for it." He nodded. She left him in the east wing. She walked back through the main house and up the stairs to her room, and sat at her desk and looked at the winter garden. She could see, in the kitchen garden below, the outline of the beds, the careful arrangement of them, the intention in their layout, the evidence of someone's love made solid in the earth. She wanted to see what they looked like in spring. She had wanted this since her first week here, and the wanting had only gotten cleaner and more certain as the weeks had accumulated. She was going to see them in spring, she had made sure of that. She picked up her notebook and began writing down what she had learned from the household journal. Which plants, which beds, which methods, what could be revived and what might need to start fresh. She was not a gardener by training, but she was someone who read carefully and thought things through and was not afraid of doing something slowly in order to do it right. She wrote until the light was gone from the window, then she lit the lamp and wrote a little longer. Philip Crane wrote in the last week of December. She learned of it because Aldrich mentioned it at dinner, briefly. Philip had written to say he would come in the new year if the roads permitted. She saw something ease in Aldrich's expression when he mentioned this, a slight relaxation that told her Philip Crane's friendship was not merely pleasant company, but something that mattered more than he would typically say. She was glad for it. She had been thinking, in the weeks since the storm, about the shape of Aldrich's life, not with pity, not any longer, but with the practical attention of someone who is looking at something real and thinking about what it needs. He had managed alone for so long that he had come to treat aloneness as a condition of his existence rather than as a circumstance. He had one friend who visited, and he had, now, her. She thought that a person should have more than one friend who visited. She thought about what it would mean to make this house, the house he had kept running and protected and maintained, the house where the staff had been with him for decades, and where Frederick's sitting room still had bookmarks in the books, into somewhere that people actually wanted to come. Not the performing kind of wanting. Not the kind where people came because the Duke was important and it was useful to be seen in his circle. The genuine kind. The kind where people came because the house was warm and the conversations were good and there was something alive in the rooms. It was not an impossible project. It was, in fact, quite a manageable one. She had been doing it, without formally naming it as a project, since the day she walked in and told him plainly that her father had sent her as punishment. She thought, this is what I am good at. She thought, this is something worth being good at. She thought about the household journal and the kitchen garden and the 14 layers of hills and the sound of his laugh, brief and genuine, about the limestone, and she thought, this is what choosing actually means. Choosing is not a single moment. It is not the letter to her father or the decision in the study. Choosing is what happens every day after, the morning walks and the evening conversations, and the books left on tables, and the lamps moved, and the portraits turned. It is the accumulated practice of deciding, again and again, to be present in the place where you are. She was choosing every morning. She was choosing at every dinner. She was choosing in the east wing and in the kitchen garden and on the ridge, and in the library, and at the morning room table, with its bay window and its pale December light. She was very good at choosing, it turned out. She had simply not had, until now, something worth choosing. On the last evening of December, she and Aldrich sat in the sitting room after dinner with their tea, and the fire was warm, and the house was quiet around them, in the way of a house that has been well managed for a long time and knows it. The new year tomorrow, she said. Yes, he said. What do you want from it? He looked at the fire for a moment. She did not mind the pause. She had learned to enjoy his pauses. The way they meant something was being genuinely considered, rather than quickly assembled. The same things I always want, he said. The estate to run well, the staff to be secure, the problems that are manageable to remain manageable. Those are responsibilities, she said. What do you want? He looked at her. The fire was low and the room was warm, and his face in that light was the face she had been learning for months. Every expression, every careful movement. For this to continue, he said, what we have been doing. The evenings, the talking, the arguments about books. Which you lose, she said. Which I dispute. I know, she said. I enjoy the disputes. I know, he said. You have mentioned it. She smiled. She did not try to contain it. It was the particular smile that had become, over the months, entirely safe here, Not performed, not managed. Just real. He looked at her smile with the expression that she had come to understand was the closest he came, in unguarded moments, to his own version of it. "There is something I want to say," he said. "Then say it," she said. "I have been thinking about what you told me, when you said you were staying because you were choosing to." He looked at the fire. "I have not been chosen before. Not in that way. People have come to this house with arrangements or obligations or—" He paused. "I have not been chosen." She was very still. "I want you to know," he said, "that I understand the value of that, what it means. And I—" He looked at her again, fully, with that complete unguarded attention that was still, even after months, the most precise thing she had ever been given. "I am not yet practiced at saying the things I want to say in the way they deserve to be said. But I am." He paused. "I am trying to be better at that." "You are doing well," she said quietly. "I am not trying to do well," he said. "I am trying to do honestly. Those are different things." "You are doing honestly then," she said. "You are doing that very well." He nodded. He looked at the fire. Outside, the last night of December lay over the northern grounds with its usual quiet authority. The dark sky, and the cold, and the wind, pressing its familiar case against the windows. Inside, the fire burned, and the clock ticked, and the house held what it held, all the grief and history and careful maintenance of it, and also, now, this. Two people in a warm room, honest with each other, learning what it felt like to be chosen. She picked up her tea. She looked at the window. "The kitchen garden," she said. "What about it?" "I have been planning something for the spring." He turned. "What kind of something?" "The kind your mother would have approved of," she said. "I found her journal. I know what she intended for it. I think it can be done." He was quiet for a moment. "The journal," he said. "I left it on your desk last week," she said. "There was no pressure to read it. There still is not. But it is there." He looked at the fire. "I know," he said. "I have read half of it." She looked at him. "She had a very good voice," he said. "You were right." She held this in her chest for a moment, said nothing. "In the spring," he said, "I can help with the garden. I know what grew there before." "I know," she said. "You told me, the first day you showed it to me." "I remember," he said. Of course he did. He noticed everything, and he remembered everything, and he had been, for 11 years, doing both of those things entirely alone, and for no one. She thought, not anymore. She thought, this is what I am staying for. She did not say it. She did not need to say it. It was simply true, sitting quietly in the warm room between them, on the last night of a year that had begun in a gray house with a shuffling man, and a carriage at 7:30. And that was ending here, in the right place, with the right person, and with all of the spring still ahead. Spring arrived gradually. The way things worth waiting for always arrive, not all at once, but in increments, each one a little more than the last, until one morning you walk outside and realize that the world has committed to being different, and there is no going back to what it was. The first sign was the kitchen garden. Alara was there early on a morning in late February when she saw it, the first green pushing through the dark soil in the bed nearest the south wall, where the wall caught the sun and held its warmth a little longer than the open ground. She crouched down and looked at it closely. It was very small, just the beginning of something that had been sleeping underground all winter, deciding whether the conditions were right, coming up now because they were. She told Aldrich at breakfast. "The south bed," she said. "The herbs your mother planted near the wall. They are coming." He looked up from his cup. Something in his face was careful and warm at the same time. "Already?" "The south wall holds the heat," she said. "I read about it in the journal." She planned the layout so that the earliest things would be near that wall. "She thought of everything," he said. "She thought of most things," Alara agreed. "And where she left gaps, I intend to fill them, with your help." "You said that in December," he said. "I meant it in December," she said. "I mean it more now." He nodded. He looked at his cup. He said, "After breakfast." After breakfast. They went to the garden together. Philip Crane had come in January, as he had promised, and had stayed for a week. The visit had been different from the previous one, different in ways that Alara noticed without requiring Philip to confirm. though he confirmed them anyway on the fourth day when he found her in the library. "He is different," Philip said. "I know," she said. "Substantially different. I am aware." Philip looked at her with his honest, easy assessment. "You are staying," he said. It was not a question. "I am staying," she confirmed. He sat down in the chair across from her, which was not the chair she expected him to sit in, and folded his hands, and said, "I want to tell you something. As his friend." "Tell me," she said. "I have known Aldrich since we were 17, Philip said. "I have watched him manage every hard thing that has come to this house, the title, the debt, his father, Frederick, with a thoroughness that was remarkable, and a loneliness that was—" He stopped. "That was painful to watch, because he would not admit to it, not even to me, and I could not address what was not admitted." She listened. "You have done something in 5 months that I was not able to do in 15 years, Philip said. "And I am not saying this to diminish my friendship with him, or to suggest that I failed him. I think the reason I could not do it is that I was too known. He could manage me. He had been managing me for years. You arrived without any of the existing patterns, and you refused to be managed." She thought about this. "I did not do it deliberately," she said. "I know," Philip said. "That is why it worked." He went back to his maps and his conversations with the groundskeeper, and the visit continued pleasantly, and when he left, he shook Alara's hand with a warmth that went beyond courtesy. "Look after him," he said. "He does not need looking after," she said. "He is perfectly competent." "I know," Philip said. "I mean the other kind." She understood what he meant by the other kind. In March, she began the kitchen garden in earnest. She had the household journal. She had her notebooks full of careful plans. She had the groundskeeper, a quiet and knowledgeable man named Arthur, who had worked the land around the manor for 20 years, and who regarded her plans with initial skepticism, and then, as she demonstrated that she had done her research, with increasing respect. And she had Aldrich. He came to the garden in the afternoons when his mornings of estate work were done, and he worked alongside her without requiring direction, because he knew this land as well as he knew anything, because he had grown up beside this garden and had maintained it all the years since his mother died, in the particular way that someone maintains a thing they love when they do not know how to love it actively, by keeping it from falling into disrepair, by making sure it survived, even when they could not bring themselves to do more than that. Now he did more than that. He knelt in the dirt with her, and they replanted the south bed according to his mother's original plan, which was recorded in her journal in her clear, precise handwriting. They worked in companionable quiet or in easy conversation, moving through the beds with the efficiency of people who have learned each other's rhythm. One afternoon, she was on her knees working at a particularly stubborn section of old root, when she looked up and found him watching her. Not the careful observational watching she had first noticed on the morning of the chair, but something warmer, less careful, something that did not immediately reorganize itself when she caught it. She looked at him directly. He did not look away. "You are watching me," she said. "I am," he agreed. "I thought you had learned," she said, "that I notice." "I had learned it," he said. "I am choosing not to avoid it." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she went back to the root. "Fair enough," she said. He made a sound that was, she had learned to recognize over months of careful accumulation, his version of a laugh. The first conversation with the county came in April. She had known it would come eventually. Voss Manor existed within a social context. However removed, the Duke kept himself from it, and eventually the fact of a young woman resident in his household would produce inquiries from the county families who had been watching from a polite distance. The inquiry came in the form of an invitation to a dinner at a house 12 miles north, from a family named Lawson whose eldest daughter, Alara had once been considered as a possible match for the Duke, before it became clear that the Duke was not going to be matched by anyone's consideration but his own. "We should go," she said, when Aldrich mentioned the invitation at breakfast, with the expression of a man who had already decided not to. He looked at her. "We." "If you are comfortable with that," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "What you mean is that you think I should go, and that you are offering to come with me, so that it is less unpleasant." "I mean that we have been in this house for 5 months," she said, "and the outside world still exists, and occasionally encountering it is probably reasonable. And yes, I think going together is better than going alone. I have not gone to anything in this county in 9 years, yes, she said. I think that is in fact a reason to go. Not punishment, a reason. He looked at her steadily. She looked back at him steadily. He said, "You are going to continue suggesting things like this." "Regularly," she confirmed. He nodded. "Then we will go." The dinner at the Lawsons was interesting, in the specific way that social events are interesting, when you are watching them from a comfortable remove. The county families assessed Alara with the practiced ease of people who have been assessing newcomers for generations. Some were warm, some were reserved. A few were simply curious. She watched Aldrich navigate the evening. She had not known, before this, what he was like in a social setting. She had only known him in his own house, on his own terms. Here, she could see both the effort that social interaction cost him and the genuine competence he brought to it despite that cost. He was correct and precise, and occasionally, briefly, exact in ways that made people lean forward. He returned to her side naturally when conversations ended, the way people return to a fixed point. She noticed this. She thought others probably noticed it too. In the carriage home, she said, "That was not so terrible." "It was marginally better than I expected," he said. "High praise," she said. "From me, yes," he said. She smiled at the window and said nothing more. May brought the kitchen garden into its first spring under the new plan. The south bed came up exactly as the journal had promised. The herbs in their ordered rows, the first small flowers at the border. She stood at the wall on a clear morning in the second week of May and looked at it with the satisfaction of having waited for something and having the something arrive. He was standing beside her. "There it is," she said. "There it is," he agreed. The garden was not finished. It would not be finished this year, or perhaps the next. These things took time, and she had time, and she intended to use it. But the beginning was here. The south bed coming up as planned. The beds beyond it laid out and prepared. The first evidence that what she had been building all winter was going to be real. She looked at him. He was looking at the garden with an expression she had not seen before, or rather, she had seen its components separately, and this was the first time they had assembled like this in his face simultaneously. Something open, something warm, something that was at peace with where it was. "You are thinking about her," she said. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "She should be thought about. This was hers." "It is yours now too," he said. She looked at the garden. "Both things," she said. "Both things," he agreed. They stood together at the south wall in the May morning and watched the first spring of the kitchen garden's new life, and neither of them said anything more about it, because nothing more needed to be said. She wrote to Clara Holt in the second week of May. She had written many letters to Clara over the months. Clara had written back with the generous regularity of a true friend, always asking the right questions, never pushing, understanding without being told that something was changing, and that Alara needed to let it change at its own pace. This letter was different from the others. She wrote, "I want to tell you something that I have been understanding gradually, and am now quite clear about. I came to this house as a form of disposal, my father's solution to the problem of me. You know what that felt like when it was happening, because I wrote to you about it, and you wrote back that you hoped it would be less miserable than it sounded. I want to report that it was, in fact, less miserable than it sounded. What I did not say in those early letters, because I could not see it clearly yet, was that the reason for the difference was a person." She wrote, "I have spent the past months coming to know someone who had, by all accounts I had heard, decided to be unknowable. I do not believe he ever actually decided this. I believe it happened incrementally, the way things do when you are managing a great deal of pain, and the only tool available is distance. But under the distance, and I know this because I have been close enough now to see it clearly, there is someone quite extraordinary, someone precise and caring and honest, and, when given the opportunity, genuinely funny, though he would dispute that he is funny, and the disputing is in itself funny." She wrote, "I want to tell you, before I tell you anything else, that I am not writing this with romance in my mind, although I am aware that what I am writing sounds like that sort of letter. What I am writing it with is clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you have been somewhere long enough, that you have stopped reacting, and started actually seeing. I see this man. I see this house. I see what they are, and what they have been, and what they could be, and I am. She paused. She looked at the window. She wrote, I am glad to be here, not the way I was glad in those first weeks, when I was glad simply to be somewhere that was not my father's house. The way a person is glad when they have found the right place, and they know it, and the knowing is so complete that it does not require any particular announcement or confirmation. It is simply true. She wrote, I am staying. I have been staying. I intend to continue staying. And the kitchen garden is coming up beautifully, which I think you will understand is connected to the rest of this, even if I cannot explain exactly how. She sealed the letter and sent it. Clara would understand. Clara always understood. In the evening of that same day, they were in the sitting room after dinner, which had become their ordinary habit now. The fire, and the tea, and the long, easy conversations that had replaced the careful, managed ones of the first weeks. She said, I wrote to Clara today. What did you tell her? He said. The truth, she said. I am a person who tells the truth. You have mentioned this. Many times, she agreed. She asked me, in her last letter, to describe the Duke to her. She wanted to know what I had found. He looked at her. What did you tell her? She considered. Precise, she said. Caring, honest, occasionally funny, which he disputes. I do not dispute it, he said. I simply do not consider it a significant characteristic. It is, she said. It is one of the most significant ones, because it is the one that is hardest to perform. You cannot manufacture the kind of funny that you are. It comes from the way you look at things. He was quiet for a moment. You said caring, he said. I said caring, she agreed. You did not say that in the early weeks. No, she said. I did not know it in the early weeks. I suspected it, from the lamp in the library and the fence and George's employment, but I could not say it with certainty until I had more evidence. And now you have enough evidence. Many times over, she said. He looked at the fire for a long moment. She let him have the moment. I want to say something, he said. Then say it, she said. You know how I feel about that. He looked at her. I know how you feel about most things, he said. I have been paying attention. I know, she said. So have I. You are the only person, he said, who has been in this house and chosen, actively and deliberately, to know it, to learn it, to... He paused. He was working through it, in the way he worked through things, following it to the right place. To decide that it was worth knowing. Most people who came here saw the closed rooms and the turned portraits and the weight of it, and they... He stopped. They left, she said. You did not leave. No, she said. Why? He said, and it was a genuine question, the kind that comes from someone who has spent a long time not being able to explain something and is trying to understand it now. She thought about it honestly. Because the closed rooms were interesting, she said. Because I have always been more curious about what is difficult than about what is easy. Because, she paused, because I looked at you across the dinner table on the first night, and I saw a person who was very far away, and I found that I wanted to know what he would look like close up. The fire crackled. The clock ticked. And, he said. And he is better, she said. Close up. He is considerably better than he appeared from across the table, though the distance was not uninteresting either. He was very still. Ilara, he said. She had not heard him use her name like that before. He had used it, here and there, over the months, but not quite like this. With that quality in it, that full attention brought to a single word. Yes, she said. I want you to know, he said, that what you are to this house, to me, is... He stopped. He pressed his lips together in the way he did when he was being precise. I do not have a word that does the thing justice. But I want you to know that I am aware of it, that I will continue to be aware of it. I know, she said. How do you know? Because you moved the lamp, she said. Because you turned the portrait. Because you put a blanket over me when I fell asleep in the drawing room, and you never mentioned it. She looked at him. Because you notice things, and you act on what you notice, and you have been doing that for months, and the person who does those things is aware, Aldrich. I have never doubted it. He sat with this for a moment. Good, he said quietly. She nodded. They sat in the sitting room as the evening settled around them, in the house that had gone from gray and closed to something opening, room by room, like a question being answered gradually, not all at once, but steadily, each part arriving in its time. The portraits were all facing forward now. She had noticed this without remark, one by one over the past months. Each one returned to its original position. The last one had been turned back in March. The east wing was no longer always closed. Frederick's books still had their slips of paper in them, and she had not moved them, but the door was open now on most days, and light came in through the windows, and the room was not held in suspension anymore but simply present, part of the house, as it had always been. The kitchen garden was coming up. And in the sitting room, in the evenings, two people who had been sent and placed and arranged by other people's decisions had arrived, by their own movement toward each other, at something that was entirely and irrevocably theirs. She thought, the spring is here. She thought, I chose this. She thought, I will keep choosing it. Outside, the May evening stretched long and pale over the northern grounds, and the kitchen garden was growing in the last of the light, and the 14 layers of hills lay in the distance, exactly as they had always lain, patient and enduring, there for anyone who thought to count them. She had counted them. She intended to count them again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the one after that. For as long as the spring kept coming, and she kept choosing to be here when it did,